Hello, hello, welcome, welcome. We are here. We are queer. Get used to it. There we go. All right. Yeah. So let's start today. Let's talk about because this map feature on my has been so much fun that we can start talking. Let's bring up the maps because we all freaking love the map, even if it covers me. Let's let's shrink me for a moment. Bring up the map. We're gonna start talk about some Euron because everyone's everyone loves some Euron. Everyone loves sexual abusers of children. Everyone loves them as like awesome, edgy characters. So let's do that, and let's talk about the Corsair King. So, in case you um, did not remember, there is a reference to a character in A Song of Ice and Fire called the Corsair King. And the thing is, with the name being Corsair King, Pirate King, it could be many, but nonetheless, we first hear about a Corsair King um, in A Storm of Swords when Dany makes it into Slaver's Bay. She finds out that there is some competition for buying her Unsullied. What's going on here? Why? There we go. So, can I make this? Let's make. Is that better? Is it better? Let's make this. Let's make this black. Can I make this black? Background. No. Background color. Text box. Come on. Come on. It says it's black and yet it's white. But nonetheless. So we got this king. So she hears about this king arriving like a week before her. Like very, very soon before her. In fact, the exact quote is only 3 days passed. I showed these same Unsullied to a Corsair king who hopes to buy them all. Now that's quite impressive. Like who is looking to buy 8,000 Unsullied? 8,000 Unsullied, because this is how many she's shopping for. There's 8,000, and some Corsair king comes in and wants 8,000 of them and has the money for it. So it's not just a pirate king, but an exceptionally rich pirate king who can buy enough soldiers to conquer kingdoms. Okay, because 8,000 is huge. So let's see if I can. We then also hear about in the Queenmaker chapter there's discussions of things that are going on in the world, and they mention a Corsair king rising up in the Basilisk Isles and then raiding Tall Tree Town. So we hear about this Corsair king in these two locations. Now, realistically, let's also talk about Euron. And so Euron and where Euron is at this moment. Now, we know that Euron has to know that Dany is in Slaver's Bay. And we also know that he picked up the warlocks and ran into them. So he was there. He didn't just hear about it, he was there. So we know that sometime after so we know that Euron picked up these warlocks somewhere between Slaver's Bay and Karth. We know that he was here. at some point around the time Dany was. And we also know that Euron, of course, ends up in the Iron Islands here. And he ends up there, what, in the middle, near the of Storm of Swords. And we know that Dany's chapters happen kind of all at the beginning of Storm of Swords. They're spread out, but the time structure of Storm of Swords is weird. Dany's stuff happens over the course of a couple weeks, all at the beginning of Storm of Swords, and then the rest of the book happens. And then there's a time jump if you read the Dany chapters in between A Storm of Swords and Dance with Dragons, where she's been ruling for a little bit. So we can draw this line and see that during the exact same time period that we're talking, that a Corsair king was here and in Tall Train's Town, and then ends up in the Iron Islands. So either there's another incredibly powerful pirate king who's roaming the seas, rich enough to buy like 8,000 Unsullied and everything, at the exact same time Euron is. Or, Euron is the Corsair king. Now, just to be fair, we also hear that perhaps that there's a rumor that the head of the Stonemen is a Corsair king from the Basilisk Isles, which doesn't really fit into anything. Maybe it's a rumor, or something. So just to be fair, that is there, and that doesn't exactly really fit. Like, how was Euron in there all the time and then came out? Because at the same time, if we accept that Euron and the Corsair King are the same person, and we get this line of Euron's trip, we can kind of go back to the beginning and extrapolate and go back to the big, like extrapolating the Big Bang, and come back to Karth, where we hear about a Urrathon Nightwalker. And the thing about Urrathon Nightwalker is, you might think, oh, is Urrathon... why should we think that Urrathon Nightwalker is Euron? Well, I mean, Euron, Urrathon, there's that. But also, Urrathon is an Iron Islands name. And we know this from the World Book, that there was a character named Urrathon Goodbrother, who, and so you can kind of piece it together that we've got this Ironborn name. We've got Euron appearing and grabbing warlocks. We have a Corsair king looking for soldiers. We have a Corsair king raiding Tall Trees Town. And then we have Euron showing up on the Iron Islands. You can kind of like create this line of his adventures the whole way. Now, there's a few things that are interesting about this. Is one, it kind of makes it hard for him to be the head of the Stonemen, but also people talk a bit about, did Euron have a dragon's egg, give it to the Faceless Men, and then have the Faceless Men go and kill Balon? And the thing is there's not really time for that. Because if we accept that Euron is the Corsair King, he's down here, and it's a fast trip to get him back. Remember, Balon dies in the middle of Storm of Swords. So for him to like somehow shoot up to Braavos and make a deal with the Faceless Men, and then shoot back down, is a bit much when it comes to time. Now, maybe he did this all in some way, ravens, glass candles, whatever. If Euron is Urrathon, that means he has some sort of access to a glass candle, which means, that's why he's in Aeron's head and stuff like that. But it kind of makes it very, very difficult for him to be making any deals with the Faceless Men. which is why I never really liked that theory. One, I mean, it was just, I don't know. I understand that it's like right there in those visions with the Ghost of High Heart, but I always felt that it's a little too easy. It's a little too easy, and doesn't really make sense with the timeline and the blockade that the Ironborn had. So anyway, where are we? Where are we? George R. R. Martin is love. Preston by confirmed. I wish, man. It would be so much. Man, it would have just been so much easier. Have so many more options, right? Your Frey Civil War video is a masterpiece and my all-time favorite. Jeez, thank you. I'm fascinated by House Frey. After 6 years, is there anything you change or have any additional thoughts on? With regards to the the Frey Civil War video, there's not much. Like, keep in mind that like I sometimes go back to that video because there's so much detail in that video. I often sometimes forget various pieces of detail and then go back to reference my own work there and be like, oh, right. No, that totally makes sense. I mean, in truth, like it's very nice to say that, but it's one of those videos I'm very proud of because it was a lot of just poring over the appendices and making connections that no one else had ever done and or ever thought about. And I guess it's one, like, there's various things like Quentin is alive, for example. That wasn't my theory originally. And, it's like, yes, I found some things to build upon it, but fundamentally, like it was somebody else's, And what I like about Frey Civil War, it's like, yes, people kind of had this idea that there'd be a Frey Civil War, but no one was really talking about an actual like Vale Riverlands like kind of clash and how things would play out and the factions in that respect. And so yeah, I mean, so in that sense I was very proud of it and in kind of piecing those things together and making those connections. I'm trying to think of anything that I've learned about or thought about since that time. Okay, yeah, the one big thing I would actually say, and it's fairly recent, is Jenna Lannister. Now that I've like talked it through and thought about it, I really do think that Jenna Lannister is going to be called to King's Landing to be regent. And that greatly affects the crown and like her decisions and her desires that she explained to Jaime in A Feast for Crows, like becoming like fully part of the plot. Like it wasn't just a random thing that Jaime was just shooting the shit with Jenna Lannister and she was talking about her being upset about not getting dairy, like that. That becomes relevant when she is given more power, and I think that getting more power is going to be a huge part of like the Winds of Winter if it were to ever come out. So yeah, I think the Jenna Lannister's importance, which is huge in establishing kind of the main idea of the Civil War, because in the Jaime story, he essentially has these like random adventures that people are like, what does this have to do with anything? Like, why is Jaime stopping by Derry? Like, yeah, he gets to talk to Lancel, and establishes Lancel as a religious zealot, but Lancel was already established as a religious zealot in the Cersei chapters. So, she talks to him at the burning of the Hand's Tower. So there was no actual need for Jaime to delve into anymore. And so I like to think that each of like Jaime's adventures actually has like a function and a point. Like, what was the point of him going to Derry and finding all of the Freys gathering there? And then, what's the point of him going to Harrenhal and finding Bonifer Hasty there? Like what's the importance of Bonifer Hasty? And then what's the point of him like talking to Jenna? Yeah, there's some nice moments that like strike about you know Jaime and Tyrion's personality and Jenna Lannister's like opinions on it. But I think that's it's rather significant. You try to take these things and make them significant to the story. And so I think that's kind of the big thing is I would have had more about Jenna. Have you read David Foster Wallace? You seem to bring him up every few streams. Yeah, no, I actually there was a period of time where I really loved David Foster Wallace. I've read all of his stuff except for the second half of Infinite Jest. I only made it about halfway through Infinite Jest, and then I didn't read the new like posthumous book that but no, there's a time where I was really really into him. He uh and he has I think his speech online that you can find like this is water and stuff that he speaks to Kenyan college graduates is pretty incredible. He's a great writer. What's funny is I actually think him sprinkling so much vocabulary in Infinite Jest was to its detriment, and that was the thing that kind of made it unreadable, um, which which is a little too bad. A friend of mine said recently that he loved Infinite Jest and it wasn't a problem because now you can read it on the Kindle and every time you see a word you don't know, you just tap on it and the dictionary immediately pops up. And I was like, well, that's a very different experience than how the rest of us like in the 90s had faced Infinite Jest. Um, but it's a very he has a lot to say and he's very smart and obviously he's a genius and his entire story is tragic, but I do think that eventually you kind of get past him and kind of go, oh wow, like you're way too obsessed with something that the rest of the world like isn't really that obsessed with. Like I understand like he believes that the world is obsessed with commercialization, but he's obsessed, but we're not actually that obsessed with it. And he's more obsessed with society being obsessed with commercialization than it actually is. Like, it's amazing that like his obsession with society's obsession is actually greater than society's true obsession and things like that. And because you realize that, he's a manic depressive and once he kills himself, you kind of go, oh yes, all of his writing makes sense. He really needed help, and he was trying to get help, but it was just too much. But yeah, he's a fantastic writer. But if you want an introduction to him, I think Brief Interviews with Hideous Men is great because it's just these short stories. But there's so many really tragic, memorable things. The thing what makes him such a great writer is even 20 years after reading some of his stories, I like they still are very salient to me. Like the stuff I read, I was like, wow. And I still think about them. I still think about a short story called Depressed Girl in Brief Interviews with Hideous Men. And I still think about there's a story about a guy who describes why he like only gives pleasure to women during sex and like doesn't take any pleasure for himself in this long like essay. I still think about like how nuts and crazy and dark David Foster Wallace can get in that, and it's I mean it's been 20 years since I read it, so it's amazing. So let's see. Preston, you said once in a stream that liberal and leftist are not the same. Liberal and leftists are the same. Not true. Liberal wants socialist elements and welfare. Liberals want to do away with capitalism completely. So I think what you're saying is like so today there seems to be these definitions change every few years, but today there seems to be this idea of that there's left wing is broken up between the liberals and the leftists. And that some would say that liberals are, kind of status quo people that are, left leaning. They want capitalism and they want a mix of like socialist programs to make up for all the problems that capitalism produces, which is the main one. The main problem that capitalism produces is the fact that wealth rides up to the rich and creates an unstable situation. So with a progressive tax structure, you can take that wealth and then redistribute it back to the poor through social programs, and then try to create a system like that. While leftists would say that the entire capitalist system is wrong and that it needs to be done away with. The problem with these definitions, and why I think they're kind of silly, is I don't think the people that use them understand what capitalism is or understand what socialism is. Like, I just don't like, are you a leftist, say, if you want our society to look like Sweden, or are you a liberal? And it all depends on like who you would ask. I mean, as a liberal who thinks Adam Smith is incredible and is an economist who believes in capitalism and like wants like increased social programs, I'm called a communist all the time. I'm called a communist all the time. I'm called a socialist all the time by right-wing people. So it's all very weird. And I don't know if you actually sat down with leftists and you really interviewed them, like, and you said like, well, what do you believe? Do you believe that, cell phones should be sold on the market? Do you believe, because there's a difference when you ask people like, oh, do you think healthcare should be sold on the market versus telephones, so yeah, once you get to, obviously no one would deny that once you get to the far left of American politics, you start getting to ideas of socialism and communism. Socialism being very poorly defined. No one knows what it is. No one would deny that. Just like if you go to the the far right, you're going to get the fascists, right? So, but it's like where people put these labels and then how prevalent they are. Like, I don't think there's, for example, not a single leftist in government, in elected government in America. Like, I don't think you can find a single one. Like, even if you go to a super liberal place like Berkeley, California, you're not going to find an actual communist like in place, like trying to tear down capitalism. Like that doesn't exist anywhere. So like at some point that the term leftist is kind of useless. Like, I understand that like Hassan Piker theoretically is a communist or whatever. But even if he were put in power, would he really implement those ideas? I don't even know. Like, and he seems to love people like, AOC. AOC's in power. She doesn't push forward anything leftist. Everything is liberal, right? Like, so, you can say that like there's a difference between leftists and liberals, sure, but then there's no leftists. Like, there's no leftists in the world. There's no leftists in power. I mean, there's a few tapping away to make interesting videos on YouTube, but it's just it's not a practical like system in any sense. There's no like path to tearing down the capitalist system. Like, no one knows what that means. It's just it's very silly. It's like saying we should colonize Mars. Like, okay. Do we have any path forward to that? No, we don't. Like we're just saying it. So I mean, that's the difference. Is like you can say that there's a theoretical difference between liberals and leftists, but it's navel gazing and it's pointless. Like, it doesn't mean anything. Because there's no leftists in power. There's no leftists even close to being like the thought of one coming to power anywhere in America is just not even comprehensible. And that's very different than, say, like fascists. like in America, we can actually conceive of fascism happening because it almost happened just a few years ago. Like we can actually like conceive of democracy being suspended, um, and elections ending and things like that. Like that's actually conceivable. And we don't really have a word for it. We just call them the hard right versus like the right, you know. But you know, so I don't know if like there's much use to like focusing on it too much, like the difference between a leftist and a liberal, because it's completely useless to even differentiate between them. Um, so is Garion dead or the Shrouded Lord? You know, I would I mean, Garion being coming back into the story would be great. It seems to be something so bold. Like if Garion just showed up with like with an army and started doing crazy stuff like on Aegon levels, that's a boldness that only George could put in there, and it seems pretty bold even for him. Like Garion was essentially only introduced like as a concept, what like in A Dance with Dragons. So I mean he's mentioned in A Storm of Swords, but you know he's not really like he's, you know, they don't really talk about like what happened to him and his search for Bright Roar and everything until A Dance with Dragons and stuff like that. So if like he all of a sudden came in and started disrupting stuff and being stuff, like um it would be a little late game, right? Now him being the Shrouded Lord, I think there's elements that make sense. The fact that like Tyrion connects the Shrouded Lord to his father so much and thinks that the Shrouded Lord looks like his father and stuff like this. And there was like chapter cut where Tyrion would like met him. But even that would have been really fast, considering that like all of the Garion stuff is introduced like right beforehand. So it's like you're introducing all of this backstory and then immediately having Garion be the Shrouded Lord. So I don't know. If we bring him back like much later and he has like a minor role or something, it might be better. I mean, I think that definitely George was thinking about it, just because he's like on his way to meet the Shrouded Lord, and then all this Garion talk comes up that maybe Garion is the Shrouded Lord, and then George himself like became chicken and was like, maybe this is too much, or something like that, you know. Now it seems too late. It seems so late to bring Garion. Garion he would just throw things up. He would just flip the board so much. Um, in the Game of Thrones pinball game, House Martell's ability will add one ball to the Blackwater multi-ball event. Does this mean there is a secret Martell heir? Quentin is alive, perhaps? But this is this is during the Battle of the Blackwater, right? Um, I mean, obviously this is a pinball game and they didn't think about this at all, but you know, the Martells could have been at the Battle of the Blackwater. You know, they could have sent forces. Tyrion sends. So if we go back to a Game of Thrones, a Clash of Kings, Dorne Martell calls his banners and brings his people to the Bone Way, and they in order to bring them into the fold on the pro Lannister side, uh, they arrange Myrcella to marry Tristan, and she gets sent down to Dorne. And then, almost unrealistically, the Dornish do nothing. They do nothing. They get the Princess of the Realm, and then they just do nothing. They send no forces. It's was pretty bold. It's pretty bold considering that they only have like 10,000 spears. Granted they're lying and everything, but it's amazing how like Cersei thinks about how unjust this is, but like it's amazing that everybody else isn't like, wow, we just gave away a hostage and got nothing in return, on this fear that maybe the Martells would join Stannis. Like, okay. And be too late to arrive anyway. So maybe realistically, in a more realistic world, they would have sent a nominal force. Like when Robb called his banners, Lady Dustin sends a nominal force, just enough that she's not questioned. And the Dornish should have done that. Realistically, the Dornish should have done that. They should have sent a nominal force, enough to appease the throne. Instead they send nothing, which is really quite weird. In fact, Oberyn is worse than that. He goes and he acts like a freaking ass the whole time. When what are the Dornish aren't really holding very many cards, So maybe that was their thinking, that send a few more Dornish, and then you can get that, add one ball to your Blackwater multi-ball event. Joel says, also, I'd like to apologize to Carmine for any misunderstandings. Carmine's funny. He has thick skin. I don't remember him mentioning being offended by anything with you. I think he's offended by others. Will China invade Kinmen and Matsu Islands? So this is an interesting question. So for those that don't know, the let's see here. So when a lot of people think about Taiwan and China, they we know where Taiwan is, we know where China is, and you got these Taiwan Straits. But one of the things that people don't realize that's a little more interesting is this: Taiwan actually owns a couple of very small islands off the coast of China. This is Kinmen, Jinmen, and Matsu Island. And so growing up, like if you were, say, from a city like Xiamen, you would grow up and see Taiwan, like see a Taiwanese owned island, like right there. And they used to put big speakers on these islands to blast propaganda, though I don't know if anybody heard the propaganda, maybe fishermen, and so it's been very weird that China's never taken those islands, or that Taiwan's been able to maintain them. But it's kind of a line, it's a line to cross. I would say that when people say, "Oh, is China going to invade Taiwan?" I think they would try taking one of those islands first to test the waters to see if the United States reacted before they would try anything like taking Taiwan. But no, I mean, if it would be too much, right? That's a trigger of war if you do something like that. It's like taking the Falklands, you just don't do it. But they are right there. They're right there. Kinmen Island is famous for making the hard alcohol. The hard alcohol, the national hard alcohol of Taiwan is something called Ganliao, and it's made in Jinmen Island, and it's very much an important part of the Taiwanese culture. But otherwise, they're pretty sleepy little islands. Hardly anybody lives there. They're pretty quiet. What was the original Long Night in your opinion? I mean, in my opinion, I think the Long Night is is a nuclear winter. I don't think that like it has to do with planetary shifts. I don't think it has to do with magic. I think that there was a nuclear bomb that went off, and that the there's a nuclear winter, and everybody went underground, and I think people use different methods to survive. So you could, you know, if it weren't for the show, I'd be like, well, clearly the others was like one method for man to like survive the coldness. They altered their bodies or created suits. Maybe the squishers was another method that people genetically engineered their bodies to go underwater. And you know, everybody else kind of lived in these subterranean locations like Casterly Rock or the crypts beneath Winterfell, or all the caves of the Eyrie to protect them from the cold. And that and while they were down, they just like Bran eating mushrooms and whatever, they survived for long periods of time. That their periods of isolation together perhaps gave them telepathic powers, telekinetic powers, which is why you have Starks and Targaryens and such that can do special things. But that's what I believe based on like George's previous work, if he's recycling himself. But you know, because this is like the exact plot of Dying of the Light or In the House of the Worm, or all the interregnum stories of the Thousand Worlds and stuff like that. Keep in mind, Dying of the Light, it's specifically like during a war, they like go underground and they get telepathic powers to control banshees while they're being inbred and such on underground. Could glass candles be two-way, i.e. using one makes your own mind vulnerable to others with candles? Could Euron use this to read Sam's mind? I mean, I kind of think that like everybody's vulnerable, but it's interesting to think that the glass candle, like you think you're in power with the glass candle, but in fact, the person that you're invading has a stronger mind than you. I would think that would be possible, just in the same sense as there's this warning about Bran with the wolf, that if you don't have a strong enough will, the wolf's mind is going to take over yours. And he's choosing to go into the wolf. Like the wolf isn't sitting, it's not like Summer is sitting there going, I want to warg into Bran. It's Bran choosing to warg into Summer. Or if you want to take a more obvious example of Rickon like going into Shaggy Dog. It's not Shaggy Dog choosing to warg Rickon. It's Rickon choosing to warg Shaggy Dog. And he's the one like having his mind taken over by Shaggy Dog. So conceivably you could have that same situation, right? That you have a glass candle, you think you're the one in power and you're in control, and in fact the other person's in control and they start taking over your mind. But I think that Euron could read Sam's mind. I mean, Euron, if he's Urrathon Nightwalker, I think Euron probably has a glass candle already. But even if he didn't, would Euron be strong enough to read Sam's mind? I think so. If Sam's going to be using it and stuff like that, whoever has a stronger mind and stronger will, or I think more in a more relevant sense, Euron, right? Like if Euron is the one that keeps like telepathically invading Euron's mind, but then we eventually find that Euron is the one that is the telepathically strong one, and that he can actually control Euron. That'd be an interesting like flip on things, you know. I mean, that'd be a nice ending. That it turns out that it's Euron who ends up having control over Euron rather than Euron having control over Euron. Do you think? Who do you think is following Bran in Bran 1, A Dance with Dragons? It's described by Cold Hands as a human foe, but who would be that far north at this point? Now we're talking. So in the first chapter of A Dance with Dragons, they become scared of men, and then and he then Cold Hands then like doubles back and kills the guys, and then they end up having a feast later, which you're so supposed to think that maybe he's it's cannibalism, right? I'm trying to think here. So the idea is that there were 5 of them. They end up killing 5 people, and Summer looks at their bodies. So that's 5. It's 5 of the mutineers from Craster's Keep, leaving 4 mutineers left, whose location is a mystery. I'm trying to think. Yeah, here it is. Men, the stink of them filled the world, alive, and they had been as many as fingers on a man's paw, and now there were none, dead, done, meat. So this is why we know that there's 5 of them, cloaked and hooded once, but the wolves had torn their clothing in the frenzy to get the flesh. Those who still had faces wore thick beards crusted with ice-frozen snot. The falling snow began to bury what remains of them. So pale against black ragged cloaks and breeches black. This is why we know we're their night's watch. And then there's one of them that reveals that I think one of them has I want to say that there's a part where you find out that it's like that it's Alo Lop hand or whatever. But later on. But I'm trying to think if there's any other. Am I missing something? Is there any? Are they followed again? I don't think so. So I think that's, unless I'm thinking of something else, that they were perhaps being followed by the mutineers, by 5 of the mutineers, and then the mutineers, they kill them and that's it. But that's the answer is. But that it's strange that it's strange that George didn't bother like killing all 9, that he only killed 5. Could time-traveling Bran have actually orchestrated the Red Wedding? Is there any evidence? It seems very George. Well, the idea is that the Red Wedding specifically is something that at least Dany has a very early inkling of. So she goes to the House of the Undying, and they seem to have some sort of vision of the Red Wedding. And so now, perhaps as early as A Clash of Kings, Tywin Lannister had an idea of the Red Wedding. Someone read Tywin's mind and transitioned that idea to Dany. But it certainly appears to be, or it's at least presented as prophetic, that this is something that is not going to happen for a while, and yet we have a vision of it right here. And so either it's Tywin's idea that has been transferred over, or somebody is time traveling. Because, how else can you explain prophecy but without time travel? You either explain it with a time traveling deity that's beyond time, like the Christian Bible, where God is timeless, and therefore like the revelations and prophecies that they hear about the Messiah in the Old Testament come true with Jesus, or the stuff in Revelation is a prophecy of the future, that some sort of deity is beyond time, or there's time travel going on where an individual is seeing futures and bringing them back. So certainly there seems to be a time traveler. At minimum, it's undeniable that there is a time traveler at some point. Now, I would say that like beyond the Red Wedding, you can perhaps explain the Red Wedding away, that it was Tywin's idea, but generally speaking, like there's a few things that you probably can't describe without time travel. I would say that uh, people yelling Misa to Dany is pretty hard to predict, considering she went into Slaver's Bay uh, fairly spontaneously. So, you know, that seems to be something that, or Victarion on the prow of the ship and fulfilling the prophecy from the House of the Undying. Um, there seems to be a time traveler of some sort in the story. Whether it's a deity or a person is unknown. I would go again. I would say that there doesn't seem to be much evidence of deities in our story. So I would say that there is a person that's, and the only time traveler we know right now is Bran. So you start putting these things together and you say, well, where do these prophecies come from? Well, because prophecy implies time travel. And so, well, Bran is the only character that time travels. So it seems that these prophecies are coming from Bran. He's literally in a tree that can send dreams and prophecies, and he can literally time travel. And he is the only character in our story that is capable of doing this. So at this point, you kind of say, okay, well, we have one time traveler in the story. He is currently in a vessel, like a werewood that can send dreams. Is he the one that sent these visions, these prophetic visions to Dany? Did he know about the Red Wedding before the Red Wedding? And I would say yes. And I would say that like Bran needed the Red Wedding. Bran wants the Red Wedding to happen because it leads to a certain events that lead to the possibility of his eventual goal. As sad as it is that he is the one fundamentally like killing his mother and brother, he needed it to happen in order to fulfill some sort of goal in the end. But man, you're by the way, the Bran fanfic chapter is going to be coming out very soon. I love it. It's fucking great. I think might be able to be a little better, but so I'm going to work just a little bit longer on it. But it deals with all these things and what I think. It hints at all these things. It doesn't reveal them all at once, but yeah, it's if Bran is orchestrating everything, we have to say that he did something as dark as orchestrating the Red Wedding, or at least allowed it to happen, because he could change things or whatever. Did Ned kill Rickon by giving him a direwolf? I mean, Ned killed a lot of people by doing stupid things, but it was pretty dumb for him to realistically like give your kids direwolves. I mean, that's just, think about how dumb this is. Like, imagine your own father finds regular wolves in the woods and then decides that like, nah, it's completely fine for you, a 3-year-old child, to have a wolf. Okay? Like, that's just a regular wolf. He gave his own child, a 3-year-old child, a wolf because he thought it was prophetic. What completely horrible parenting. Horrible parenting. But yeah, like none of them should have had direwolves, and they cause problems. One of the direwolves ends up mutilating the heir to the kingdom's hand. Like it's not good stuff. Like, bad move, Ned. Bad move. Let's see here. But yeah, I think he caused a lot of problems by doing that. Should have just killed him. Should have listened to Theon, man. Theon was right. Okay. Um, Transcend. Hmm. What's your opinion on Into the Wild and transcendentalism? Um, I'm just trying to get the exact. I mean, I've actually like read Into the Wild and seen the movie, and so I'm actually like trying to. I just don't want to. I don't want to misrepresent transcendentalism. Um, Transcendentalism, 19th century movement. Of writers and philosophers who were loosely bound together by adherence to an idealistic system of thoughts based on the beliefs of essential unity of all creation, innate goodness of humanity, and supremacy of insight over logic and experience for the revelations of the deepest truths. German transcendentalism. Um, this is too much for Encyclopedia Britannica. Um, let's see here. Chris practiced transcendentalism was a prime example of transcendental lifestyle. Um, Relying on self-trust and self-reliance through the journey, maintaining intellectual companionship and finding dignity in manual labor. Gotcha. So for those that don't know, Into the Wild is essentially the book about a young man um, who after university rejects sort of um, a regular upper class lifestyle and instead decides that he wants to have adventures, and his adventures begin to get around America, and his adventures begin to get more extreme, and he chooses to finally, for his grand adventure, move to Alaska and learn to live off the land by himself, and he ends up perishing. um, there's a movie version of this starring um, what's the actor? Um, Emil Hirsch, and where they add certain aspects to it, and it's kind of famous for him like living in this school bus in the Alaskan wilderness. And so what the movie kind of misses is um, I've looked up like after seeing the movie and reading the books, and I looked up like where his little colony place was, and it turns out he was 3 miles from a road. Um, and I understand in the movie they show this like big rushing river, and then he can't get past the rushing river. No, in nature, if there's a rushing river, you walk a mile down and it's not rushing. I mean, and then you can cross. Like it's very rare that you're going to be finding these huge uncrossable rivers, in the middle of nowhere. Um, Especially it's framed as seasonal. Like it was not so bad, and then all of a sudden there was more rains, and all of a sudden it was rushing. Like no. Um, and just for some basic evidence of like how not far away from civilization he was, is that he lived in a school bus. Okay? Like he was living in a school bus. A school bus just doesn't end up in the middle of nature, okay? A school bus means you're fairly near a road, and so when you actually like get to what happened to him, he didn't just like, it wasn't this series of accidents like they portray in the movie where he eats poison berries and can't figure out how to smoke moose and stuff like that. It turns out he had a bunch of rice and stuff like that. He was um but he was in a sense like just depressed and didn't eat and allowed himself to die. That's what happened. When you're talking about individuals doing extreme actions, you know that there's some sort of, you know that there's something wrong, some depression going on that's forcing them into these extreme actions. And so you kind of like know that that's the real thing. Now, you kind of want to put like some sort of philosophical thing that he was some true believer in some philosophy or something. And it's like, nah, probably not. He was probably just a depressed dude who was trying to do something great and extreme and crazy. And then they kept upping the antes, and then went to Alaska, and then was just by himself, which is probably the worst thing for a depressed person to do. And then ends up, letting himself starve in a school bus in the middle of Alaska. I mean, you can look where his bus is. It's nothing. It's like, it's 3 miles from a road. And I think it's like, it's 25 miles from a town, which 25 miles is, it's not an easy walk, but you wake up early, you do the whole day, you can make it. It's so, I don't know. I think like adding more to like his ideas and like adding nobility to what he did, I think it's a bit much. I think he was just a depressed kid that wanted to try to like shake his depression by doing more extreme stuff. And I don't know, like the like self-reliance and truth and things like this, like, yeah, those things are great to a certain degree, but let's also not forget that we're social creatures. Human beings are social creatures, and we do rely on each other. And so I don't know, I think it's a bit weird, the whole thing. It's um it goes liberal, then progressive, then leftist, right? It depends who you ask. This is getting back to our discussion. It's it depends who you ask. I mean, I don't think there's any real difference between a liberal and a progressive. Liberal became, so history on that. There was a during the Dukakis Bush 1 election. Bush was trying to come up with a slur to call Dukakis. So he just went around going, he's a liberal, he's a liberal. And for a while, Dukakis is like, I don't like labels. And then finally he's like, yeah, I'm a liberal. I don't understand. And then Bush went around gloating, going, ha ha, he admitted it. He admitted he's a liberal. He's admitted he's a liberal. And so for a good period of time, liberal became this dirty word. And it took like a good decade before, and so the people are like, okay, let's start using the word progressive because it sounds better. And then eventually, like, the liberals fought back and were like, yeah, I'm a liberal. This is really fucking stupid. But the advent of the word progressive is only because of the Dukakis Bush 1 election. So to like try to like come up with this scale of like liberal, progressive, leftist, like I say, it's silly. It doesn't really mean anything, like when you really ask like really basic questions, like when you take those political alignment tests, which I actually don't think are bad. They ask questions like, oh, are you pro-choice or pro-life? Okay, pro-choice. Do you believe that like, we should have food stamp programs? Okay, yes. You start asking those like very simple policy questions, like everybody's like ducks in a row, like everybody is like aligned. So what's the difference between a leftist and a progressive and a liberal? Like, doesn't mean anything it doesn't mean anything in a practical sense, because there is no option. It's not like when people go to the ballot box, there's an option of like, do you think communism is good? Do you think we should like tear down the capitalist system? That's not an option. Like it's a useless question to ask. Like it's not like these are useless political things. It's like going to the ballot box and asking like, should we colonize Europa? Like it doesn't apply. It's like, who cares? Who cares about your views about colonizing Europa? You know, like it's not realistic. It's not presented as anything realistic. It's so like, why are we talking about it? That's why I feel about like, people, these tankies or whatever, like talking about tearing down the capitalist system. Like, okay, let's colonize Europa, like it doesn't fucking matter. It doesn't matter. It's also why I don't like hate or disagree with any of these people. Like I can like Hassan Piker and like Vosh and like David Pacman and like Biden and like AOC. I can like and like Hillary Clinton. I like all of them because they all agree on the actual like everyday things. So don't know why 5-year gap is a problem. Characters don't have to be in the same position. Could have been in surprising places, filled with memory and flashbacks. So to George, and this is out of George's experience, is that he couldn't get the 5-year gap to work with the Ironborn. He had gone and he had written something called Arms of the Kraken prior to even starting A Feast for Crows. And so Arms of the Kraken is essentially the Ironborn chapters of A Feast for Crows. You've got your Victarion, you've got your Euron, you've got your Asha. And so you kind of have this entire like backstory of who these characters are and what. And so aligning that story that he'd already written with a 5-year gap was the problem. So you kind of look at that story and you say, okay, are we going to have Asha sitting at Deepwood Mott for 5 years? It's not really a problem. Okay, we can do that. Asha Deepwood Mott for 5 years. That's fine. Euron ruling the Iron Isles and raiding the Reach for 5 years. Ugh, that's harder. How about, he could go back and remove the Reaver chapter and maybe they didn't raid. But then, like, what are you doing? Like, he goes at the Kingsmoot and is like, let's take over the world. And they're like, okay, crickets for 5 years. And then Victarion, like, jumping in his ship and, like, heading to find Dany. Is he going to take 5 years to get there and deal with Dany? So it's all completely from that perspective. Because the other things you could do, like, okay, if I take any other plot, I could say, okay, could the Dornish do nothing for 5 years? Yes, they could, because Quentin could just not be sent to get Dany. Arianne could just, not, want to raise anything for Myrcella until she's of age or something like that. It's pretty easy for the Dornish to do nothing. Is it easy for Jon to be Lord Commander for 5 years? Yeah, that's easy. Is it easy for Arya to be training at the House of Black and White for 5 years? Yes. Is it easy for Dany to be ruling Meereen for 5 years? Yes. That's all easy. Could Brienne be searching for Sansa for 5 years? It's a little weird, but somewhat doable. Somewhat doable. Could Cersei be ruling King's Landing for 5 years? Yeah, probably. Jaime be there for 5 years? Yeah. So the rest of the story, where's Davos? I'm trying to think. Davos. Could Theon be captured and be tortured for 5 years? Yes. Could Davos be in a cell in White Harbor or wherever for 5 years. Yeah, probably. Though I think the story left him at Eastwatch or something last time we saw him, so he could have just been at Eastwatch with Stannis at the wall. All that's possible. All of it's possible. However, the Ironborn one doesn't really work. Could Tyrion be living at Illyrio's manse for 5 years? Yes, but I think that I think nothing works with the Ironborn, and that the Ironborn, like George wrote Arms of the Kraken, didn't want to waste it, liked it, and so everything else is kind of that way. But that's it. I don't actually think it's could he have really written around it? Sure, I don't know, but I kind of like the lack of 5 year gap myself. I would call myself a liberal. I believe in capitalism and a welfare state. My country is more of what I want. My country is more of what I want than the USA. We have universal health care, but further from what I want than Sweden. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm not sure where you're living. It sounds like maybe something like Canada or the rest of Europe. In America, we tend not to use the term welfare state because we think it has various implications. Even though what's very funny, and this is what people don't bring this up with any conservative. I love this though. So the U.S. Constitution, which patriots in America freaking love, like they worship it like it's a holy text, right? But we the preamble of the Constitution, and perhaps it's very famous to many people, but it's let me get this here. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, and then after this, we get 5 functions of government. Okay? We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union. Number 1, establish justice. Number 2, ensure domestic tranquility. Number 3, provide for the common defense. Number 4, promote the general welfare. And number 5, secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Do ordain and establish the Constitution of the United States of America. Beautifully written. Beautifully written. So very famous. We the people. We the people of the United States, in order to form a perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, to do ordain and establish the Constitution of the United States of America. It's amazing. It's amazing if you bring this up to any conservative or libertarian, and you kind of say to them like, oh, like you're against welfare, like, and they're like, I guess you hate the Constitution. And then their first response is like, well, how is welfare in the Constitution? And then you go, and then you can quote that like, we the people, and like they immediately like become stammering, and it's just like, I mean, it's like it's the equivalent. No Christian would be this dumb, but imagine if like a Christian were like, I don't know where in the 10 Commandments it's against graven images. You're like, what are you talking about? Like, do you not know your 10 Commandments? Like, what graven images? like a Christian would at least know their 10 Commandments, but to not know like the preamble of the U.S. Constitution. So like welfare. The general welfare, promoting the general welfare, is of course like one of the functions of government, one of the 5 functions of government in the United States. But somehow this term welfare has become a very dirty word, and so we kind of say like, "Oh, the welfare state, the welfare state." They kind of say that kind of stuff, but like I say, I look at Scandinavia and I say, oh, they've got things going there. They've got their system works pretty well, so we should probably just emulate them. I'm not for any sort of abstract thinking, when you meet these like I say, communists or libertarians who want these abstract things. I was like, we have like there's a very clear, better thing, like right there, it's So, uh, this Martin we're talking about, he could give Rickard Stark and killed Bastard and have him be the shrouded lord of the Corsair King, the shrouded snow. Um, but I'm trying to think like trying to think of any thing. The problem is like this. I mean, I suppose there's Benjen. Everybody could talk about where Benjen is, but the I think part of the themes of the Starks is this like tragic idea of all of the Starks getting killed off during this Robert's Rebellion, and like what that like the trauma it gives to Ned to lose his brother, his sister, his father, and then have Benjen like leave, and like what that does to him and his sense of duty, and like what's this all for. To have any of the characters like disappear, is kind of different on what it does to Ned. Like Ned needs to have this like shock that um you know everything, because it leads to everything as well. Why he chooses to have so many kids, and why he's so protective of them even though he's not protective of them, and why he's so focused on vengeance, and why he's still hung up and hates the Lannisters over like their role in, because in the end, like the reason he kind of hates the Lannisters from the beginning because of the war, you know and so it leads to other bad things, and it's all really roots back to the fact that his father and brother and sister were all killed. Do you find the Unsullied unrealistic characters? I mean, instantly buying a fearsome army. Sellswords are at least portrayed as not dependable. Yeah, the Unsullied. Well, I mean, first of all, if you want a good fighter, you wouldn't cut off somebody's testicles. I mean, testosterone has its functions, and I think we all like from the beginning, like no, you wouldn't use eunuchs as warriors. I'm trying to think if I'm sure somebody's like sometime in history was this ever done. Um, I'm trying to eunuch soldiers. They were guards at various points in history, but because you didn't want, so people that were very protective and jealous of their women would have eunuchs as guards, and it turns out the eunuchs could still get erections, and they would still have affairs. People would still have affairs with eunuchs, but this idea that you'd use them for fighting in an army is a little ridiculous. It's also just it's just over the top. Like it's just a waste of resources on like what you would do, like why, like the thing that eventually, the thing about the pike square and using pikes in general, and why they became so dominant, and the Swiss pike, and we wrote about this when we did the John Con chapters in the fanfic. The whole reason the pike square is so effective is the fact that with minimal training, you can take a Joe off the street and make him into something that can take down cavalry. A mere 3 weeks of training, you can take a farmer, put a pike in his hand, 3 weeks of training, and make him into something. And if you have him in a big group, have him something that can take down cavalry. And they did. They destroyed cavalry. If it weren't for gunpowder, like pike squares would have been like the dominant force of warfare for many, many years after that. They destroyed knights, they destroyed cavalry, they destroyed everything. And it was just, and it's more to do with the idea. Yeah, you've got 10 by 10. You can't flank them because they just go and like it's incredible. They're incredible. It's such a simple idea. Um, you don't need like 18 years or whatever of torturing, taking dogs and having them kill dogs, and like what are you doing? Like this is not like it's not like being in a pike square is not rocket science. You don't need a bunch of eunuchs who are tortured and trained for decades to get to that level of obedience. Like it's just not necessary. It's overkill. Now, of course, like on a thematic level, they need to have been like the ultimate form of suffering, and there's something to the fact that like there's something weird about the fact that they don't have dicks, and they're following that Daenerys is this female queen uh, with a castrated army. Like there's definitely a thematic statement being made. But yeah, it's no, they're dumb. It's really dumb. Like had they, I could almost pick any other use for them would have probably been better than pike squares. Like one of the easiest things like that you're putting people together. Like the whole point of the pike square is the fact that it takes minimal training. Um, like had they been like really loyal cavalry, that made more sense. Had they been like personal guards, it made more sense. But why would you have them be a pike square? Ugh. But yeah, I mean, in truth, they're actually like some of them that we find. Like I think when George originally put Unsullied in the stories, he had the eunuchs be guards at Illyrio's manse, which is how they were used historically, because people didn't want them banging their women, even though they still did. Um, it's just, yeah, later on, like turning them into a field army is a very silly idea. Um, the Accursed King series. This is one of these series I have not read. Um, the Accursed King series are historic novels by French author Maurice Druon. American author George R. R. Martin called The Accursed Kings the original Game of Thrones, citing them as inspiration for A Song of Ice and Fire. Um, yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think. I think some people have, this idea of like Iron King and stuff like this being influence. Because what this is actually based on, um, 14th century French monarchy, and so Game of Thrones is in many ways based on the War of the Roses and things like that. Um, George had so many influences though that it's hard to know like how much is taken from this. I would have to read it for myself. Like I say, George, in my opinion, like his biggest influence is himself, taking his previous stories and bringing them back. Um, and then after that, yeah, War of the Roses and stuff like that. He has in there. But I guess let's see if has anybody done any breakdown. Let's see here. Um, I think there's some food stuff um, that actually people said that George might have taken stuff like finding capons and stuff, like capons in books and stuff. But um, I don't know if anyone's ever done like a side by side, like what things come from the Accursed Kings. Um, oh well, interesting nonetheless. Um, okay. The more you read, the more you realize how dumb Tyrion is. Oh, that's true. Um, Turning 41. Um, Your today, my tomorrow. Here's a Hobbit birthday present for you. Also, what's one of your favorite lines from A Song of Ice and Fire? Well, happy birthday. I find like 41st birthdays and 31st birthdays and like 22nd birthdays and things like this when you go a year beyond the milestone, it's a bit better because you can actually like enjoy it without thinking about um the implication of like, oh my god, I'm 40, stuff like that. um so I'm trying to think like my favorite lines from uh all of A Song of Ice and Fire. I mean, it's cliche. I know that the little finger line, that's why we call it peace, um, is one of my favorites. Um, I'm also a big fan of I like the line when Theon is in the cells and Big Walder and Little Walder come down and I think he says both were Walder Frey. I like that line a lot. Um, I want to get the full one. I don't know why I like that one so much. Both were squires. Both were eight. Both were Walder Frey. I like that one. That one always stuck with me. I'm trying to think of some others. Um, uh, the Some others that just like stick out and like I remember. Um, like good, like just good quotes. I don't know. I mean, George like opens a lot of the chapters really well. Like that's where he puts a lot of his effort. Like half of his chapters are like one-liners, right? So you'll have like a chapter like the night was rank with men or whatever. But and it almost disappoints me when the opening is not something I really love. Like the first Bran chapter in A Dance with Dragons is "Are we there yet?" And I was like, ugh, that's a real phoning it in, like so. While like Asha's, for example, are like Asha Greyjoy was sitting in Galbert Glover's hall drinking Galbert Glover's wine when Galbert Glover's maester like came to him. I'm like, oh, that's a nice one, like these are like the ones I kind of remember off the top of my head that are just kind of like good, like the Dornish prince lay 3 days dying, like you just kind of remember it, as a nice line. um and then other ones just are forgettable, but some of them really really stick with me. I'm trying to um let me see here. I have it was never truly dark and Melisandre's chambers. That's okay. The rat squealed as he bit into it, squirming wildly in his hands, frantic to escape. Um, Danny begins with like them walking up the steps, the dead men. Um, but I'm trying to just I don't know, really good ones. Yeah, Danny begins with she could hear the dead men coming up the steps, stuff like that. But just it's hard to get like ones that like are right off the top of my head. Um, Bit of a spoiler, but your beliefs around others, squishers, etc., equaling human evolution to survive is very Neil Stevenson, Seven Eves. Love your sci-fi spin. Yeah, I think I don't know. I just think it works. I mean, maybe it's a little too uh, Planet of the Apes, but it's just like everything that George has written at this point. It's odd to think about the show and how they portrayed everything, because the others are just fundamentally evil in that, and essentially a bioweapon gone crazy that the children of the forest regret, that wants to bring the true death of man, destroying, even not just killing everybody, but the knowledge of man and everything. And that in the end, like, the stories are really life, and we've got this like Tyrion speech about stories being the most important thing, and that we should have a king with the best story. Which, I mean, it feels like George, like it just doesn't feel like Dan and Dave would do something that bold, but it's like also something he hasn't quite written about yet. I mean, I suppose it's a little bit Armageddon rag about how like their story continues on and as ghosts and stuff like that. So, how much do we take in the show's portrayal of things? Maybe a lot, but I don't know if I like it as much, as the others being more complicated. I think the others being more complicated is more interesting. Rereading a Game of Thrones, Arya and Jon's interactions are very close for brother and sis. Pink letter author leveraged this. Only Mance could have known this, in my opinion. It's a very good point. However, well, Theon would know that. Theon would know it. But that kind of leads to the same place, right? So there's this is best done with maybe I'll do a little overlay. I don't know. Let's see if I can do this fast. So we kind of get this. I'll try to do this really fast, but at the wall, Stannis has a private conversation with Mance that we. Come on, let me change this. So we know that at the wall, like when Mance is in his cage or in his cell, Mance has a private conversation. Stannis has a private conversation with Mance. And then at Winterfell, during the escape, Mance has a private conversation with Theon. And then we know that like Stannis eventually has this private conversation with Theon himself. So we get this like triangle of information, right? There's certain things in the pink letter that seem to scream Theon, like he wants his reek, and then there's like knowledge of Arya that screams of like either Mance or Theon, right? But then there's like strategy in there that involved with like Stannis's like battle plans, like the wildlings and bringing them in and things like that. So this information can kind of like get to different people at different points, making it very difficult to determine who the author was. I mean, in the end, I say Mance just because we're in Theon's head, so we know that it doesn't seem like Theon did it. But could it be Stannis? Stannis is a good second guess, but you're right. And of course, like the closeness of Jon and Arya is, of course, like at that point, George wanted a romance between Jon and Arya. So it's kind of weird. It's kind of weird looking back at it all. But you are completely correct that like Jon's emotional reaction to Arya is the thing that breaks him, when all these other things didn't. And of course, this is a good point. If Mance is tortured, wouldn't Ramsay know that too? Yeah, probably. What do you think Sweet Robin's favorite Pokemon would be? Also, what's your favorite Pokemon? Jeez. There's some of the Pokemon that I think are rather clever. Um, even though I never use them or whatever, but like, do I? Oh man, it's not even. I don't even have one of those right now. There's one poke there. So some of the Pokemon I like in that you can see their evolutions um, transition. Like some Pokemon, it's just they look one way and then they transform and they look completely different. Like Magikarp going to going to um, Gyarados, right? There's just they just don't look that way. But if you look at like, I really like the way like I really think that they were quite clever in how they took Whismer. Here, actually, this one. There's a Pokemon called Whismer, and then he becomes one called Loudred, and it's quite clever because like you can see how these like ears open up and then become these little boombox speakers in the ears. And it's like the design, like I like how when the design of one influences the design of the next. And then they kind of phoned it in when they went to the last one. But like there's something quite clever about that. Or like the what is it? Bellsprout? Bellsprout. There we go. Like Bellsprout has this thing where he becomes one and then they kind of flips over and he becomes this other. And you're rearranging the strain the same evolutions to do something cool later on. So I do appreciate like the some of the time and effort they put into transitioning certain ones, and then other ones are just freaking phoned in. So it's not that big a deal. But who would Sweet Robin like? Let me think. Oh, I know. He would. This is. I mean, besides like simply a falcon, but wouldn't he like Miltank? Wouldn't he be a big fan of Miltank? You know. I mean, besides not just liking any of the bird related ones, but um, Quaith warns Danny the glass candles are burning. Soon comes the pale mare, and after her the others. Do you think she means the literal others? Obviously, I think that we're supposed to think that as readers, we're supposed to think those sorts of things. But um, I don't know if Quaith was actually thinking that. There is a scene where Danny is having sex with, has a dream that she's having sex with somebody with blue lips and an icy, and she's stabbed by like an icy penis. And like, we're obviously supposed to think about blue lips or whatever. We're supposed to think about Euron, but then we're also supposed to be thinking about the others. But in the end, like now that we know the show, we can be like, oh, right, John died and he stabs her in the end. It's actually John. Like the sex dream she's having about getting stabbed is John. Um, so yeah, I mean, the Pale Mare. Um, the thing about all these things is, obviously George is just like throwing stuff at a wall and hoping stuff sticks. Because like the Pale Mare represents like so many things, right? The Pale Mare is one, like it's the book of Revelation and the white horse in which death rides in upon, which of and so and but it's also the disease of dysentery, but it's also her own horse Silver, which um, Barristan later rides, and it's her, she rides and things like that. Um, but the glass candles are burning. Soon comes Pale Mare, and after her, the others. I mean, we're supposed to think that, but then it's like Kraken and Dark Flame, Lion and Griffin, Sun, Armor's Dragon. Trust none of them. Remember the Undying. Beware the perfume seneschal. I mean, I think it's it's uh it's for the reader, but um, I'm still hoping that Littlefinger achieves his goals. He's still my favorite character, and the show really did him dirty in the last season. Well, we still kind of don't know what his goals are. I mean, it seems to involve Sansa, right? And it probably involves marrying Sansa, even though she's betrothed to Tyrion, and he wants to marry her to Harry the Heir and things like that. Um, I when when things don't make sense, you kind of jump to prophecy, and I think I did that with the Littlefinger debt scheme. Like Littlefinger's plans don't really make sense. What if he's Bael the Bard, Peter Baelish, and he's trying to fulfill the story of like stealing the daughter of Winterfell, or maybe that's just a literary parallel that we're supposed to notice or not. It's hard to know. But will he ever get Sansa? I don't know. Probably not. uh, just obsessed with Cat. But then why was he so obsessed with Cat and things like that? Was Cat really that great? I don't know. So we'll see. We'll see. We'll see if he ended up becoming king of anything and ends up sitting any thrones or what, or fulfilling any prophecy, but we shall see. He's funny. Like, I do think he's very funny, and I love Sweet Robin interacting with him because they just don't get along or like each other, and I think it's hilarious. And I love the odd couple aspect to it. Sweet Robin throwing a bowl of porridge across the room and Littlefinger ducking and things like this. I love it. Why did Varys help Gendry? Did he hire Jaqen to kill Howland Reed to cover it up? To cover up R plus L equals J. Why did Varys help Gendry? I think he was trying to get a. I don't think he was trying to help Gendry. I think he was trying to capture Gendry. So we know that in A Clash of Kings, it's revealed that Varys. Well, it's revealed that somebody paid Euron to get Gendry, and we eventually find out that this is. I mean, we can figure it out that it's Varys because Varys is the one that set up the whole thing for Ned, which we know about. So we kind of know that yes, Varys was trying to get Gendry too, but I think it's probably because Gendry is a bastard of Robert that shows that the seed is strong. He's like it's the same as having the book, but now you've got a physical bastard to show like this is what children of Robert look like. They don't look like the king, and so like giving it to the Aegon cause or the Daenerys cause when he has Gendry he can make the statement that the Lannisters are illegitimate, and Gendry is a symbol of that. I mean, it's the same as like Maya Stone or whoever, Edric Storm as well. They're important symbols of the lack of legitimacy of the Lannisters. So I think he was just trying to get Gendry in that respect. And someone was trying to kill them off, which was probably Joffrey. But did he hire Jaqen to kill Howland Reed to cover up R plus L was J? No, I don't think there's anything that leads to that conclusion. Like what? How? Like Jaqen would have to. We'd assume that Jaqen was along for the ride to go all the way up to the neck to get off to kill Howland Reed. It vaguely makes sense. I'm not saying that doesn't make sense. He's at least like on the right route, and it does serve the Varys cause. And he, Hmm. Doesn't do a very good job. Jockin though doesn't do that though in the end, right? He goes to Old Town. So whatever Jockin was doing, he chose Old Town over it. So I guess like Jockin choosing to do something different kind of shows that it wasn't his mission. Because instead he's trying to find a glass candle. I mean, maybe Jockin wants the glass candle to find Greywater Watch, so that he can then go and kill Howland Reed. I mean, that's possible, you know. I suppose it's not. It's not. It's not the worst idea. It's not the worst idea. I'll say that. I'll say that. It would. I suppose that would vaguely make sense. Vaguely make sense that he wants to silence anyone that might know Arpleus Eloquus J. But Jockin would have to kill a lot of people, and I mean, who knows if who Howland Reed told? Man, it makes sense. It makes sense. Um, Penny and Oppo act at the Purple Wedding. Oh, Penny and Oppo's act at the Purple Wedding was supposed to distract Tyrion, but their brother and sister, and part of the act was simulating sex, so it could have been meant to upset Jaime and Cersei. Hmm. I mean, that is all true. However, Jamie like Jamie and Cersei didn't know that they were brother and sister. We don't find out that they're brother and sister until Tyrion meets them, um, which really goes to show how either George R. R. Martin screwed up with the character of Penny, or Penny is something more. Like Penny pretends to be super innocent, but she was in a pretty raunchy like mummer show where she simulated sex with her brother. And yet she's sitting there like blushing and being like, "Oh no, oh, I'm so innocent." Um, so it's I mean, either George R. R. Martin fucked up because obviously when he wrote the scene with the dwarfs, he wasn't thinking about Penny in the future. That was not on his mind. But he put her in later and made them brother and sister. But yeah, I mean, someone would have to tell Cersei and and Jamie like, oh yeah, no, those are brother and sister. Um, so so I think in that sense, it wasn't there to actually upset them. Um, why are we still in Gitmo? Is it just a place where we can do terrible things? What forces made Obama go back on his promises about it? Uh, I mean, the terrible thing that now keep in mind, like Gitmo, like I don't agree that I think Gitmo shouldn't exist, but like Gitmo, I don't think there's torture going on in Gitmo, which is kind of the implication of the terrible things. I think the terrible thing is holding people without trial, um, indefinitely. And I think somebody convinced him that there were certain characters that we somehow knew had done something bad, but we don't have evidence, so we can't release them. And if we do release them and they do something, he's going to get blamed. So um, it's one of these situations where you're like he's measuring like risk and return. Like, yeah, he promised to close down Gitmo, but how much do people really care about Gitmo? I mean, Gitmo kind of disappeared from people talking about it. So like apparently people didn't really care that much. Um and then what are the chances that you release somebody and they go on and they continue to do some terrorist act? And if they did, imagine what that would just like sink the Obama's administration, right? Like, oh God, you released these terrorists, and then they went on and did another terrorist act. Like, and so it's just this like risk and return kind of aspect to it. Like I say, I disagree with it. Like, I think it should have been closed, and you take that risk, like whatever. Um, so but that's the forces that went back on it. Was just political calculation. That's it. Um, it's hard to undo these horrible decisions that like take the airports. We still take off our shoes. Are they just getting to the point where we don't take off our shoes in America? And it's like no one wants to be the person to be like, well, I think it's time for us to stop taking off our shoes. Because then if a plane goes down because of a shoe bomb, that dude gets blamed and everybody's like, oh my gosh, he's canned and he's fired, right? So it's just like one of these calculations where it's just like, who wants to stick their neck out? It was just one of those weak. It was just one of those weak, cowardly situations where people didn't want to stick their neck out. Nisa probably means mother, as in Misa. Um, in the show, who said mother? Shireen, when she was being burned. Sacrifices will work. I mean, even independent of that, like is the idea of like Shireen being sacrificed some sort of like parallel to that story, and whether it is in actually a prophetic universal ethereal sense is irrelevant. It's whether or not like Melisandre or Stannis or Selyse sees it that way, right? Do they see it as like a fulfillment of the Nisa story? And I think there's if it was true about Shireen being sacrificed, then yeah, I think that he's then that's definitely a strong possibility, even independent of Nisa meaning mother, Misa or anything like that. I think that it's perhaps a connection to that story, or them feeling that it's a connection to the story. Also, why the Cuban embargo still? The Cuban embargo has to do with Cubans in Florida. So people still see people still see Florida as a swing state, an important place. It's becoming less of a swing state actually. So maybe things will change. But Cuban Americans are insanely against the country of Cuba. A lot of them were of the old class were of people that had lost all of their lands or had family who were political prisoners or politically killed. A lot of them have reasons to really hate the government of Cuba, and they vote, and they are a big bloc, and they care about one issue. They only care about one issue. And it's essentially that issue is be as negative to Cuba as possible. So it's these little things like, oh, why is the U.S. like so pro-Israel? Well, it's the same. Like, there's a voting bloc in Florida that has certain political opinions that only cares about one issue. These sorts of things come up. So why the Cuban embargo? Yeah, no one in America cares about the Cuban embargo except Cuban Americans living in Florida, and they don't like it. And it doesn't matter if it's rational or logical or whatever, anything. It's just they hate the government of Cuba, and they will vote against any politician who wants to lift that embargo. And no one wants to take the risk of losing those voters. So that's why. It's a niche single issue voter thing for that group. And just one of those failures of democracy. It's just one of those things. Thank you, Swimaroni. I appreciate it. Let's see here. If left to their own devices, do you think Greenland culture would outlast Ironborn culture? Oh yeah. I mean, there's nothing sustainable. I mean, Greenland culture has got its problem. It's still feudalism. But the absolute ridiculousness of Ironborn culture is over the top. Like it's not sustainable. Like you can't have a culture based on not having money. like they don't believe in purchasing things, which is just like the most ridiculous thing ever. Like you can't have like, and when I say like Ironborn, I mean the old ways, right? Like Ironborn culture outside of the old ways isn't so like, you know, it's just like mining and farming and fishing and stuff like this. That's all fine. Taking on like any adoption of Greenland culture is fine, but like the Ironborn are ridiculous. They're ridiculous, and like you just have to read the Victorian chapters to show how ridiculous, or the Euron chapters, how ridiculous they are. Like, really, you want it to be a regular initiation for everyone to be drowned and then to be have mouth to mouth resuscitation, like for every single person. Like, oh my god, like you don't want to use money. Like, oh gosh, like it's so extreme that it's just completely impractical. And I think about these kind of things with like impractical aspects of when you think about the world today. Because there are very significant political forces in the Middle East uh, that are so impractical and so unfitting with like the rest of the world that it just all falls apart. You just see how like ridiculous and dumb they are. Like people that absolutely don't want anything to work on a certain day of the week. Like, nah, we can't run elevators. Like people that want to that want to limit who people can marry. You can't marry them because when you were born, you were a certain religion. But I don't believe that. It doesn't matter. You can't marry that person. People that like won't shake hands with a woman. Like, how are they supposed to do business? How are they supposed to do like function in an environment if you like meet a business person and there's a woman amongst them and they like flip out? Like it's to the point where it's so ridiculous that you're just like, oh my god, your ways cannot function in a modern world. Like, you can talk about like cultural relativity and the existence of like, oh, we've got to respect the way people do things, and then at some point you're just like, no, like that's ridiculous. It doesn't work. Like, it just doesn't work. Like, even these, there are even some places that want to stop like teaching kids English, because they're like, oh, well, our own, it's killing our own language and we want our own language to like survive. And so we're going to like remove teaching English. And you're like, well, you're just shooting yourself in the foot. Like, whether it's fair or not, English is the international language and everybody should learn English. Every single person on earth should learn English. It brings you the most opportunity and freedom and that you can. So it's just Ironborn. Like, no, there's nothing workable. There's nothing workable about him at all. Union guy here who teaches union etiquette, public speaking for liberals and their policies. I know you're not totally bought into unions, but would love to pick your brain on them. First big union movement we've had in 30 years. No, I mean, it's like I like unions fine. I think they are a band-aid for something that should have been provided by government, and government was failing. Like I like everything that unions provide. Reasonable work hours, reasonable working conditions. Negotiating living wages and things like this. Love all that. Negotiating, proper benefits and things like that, medical benefits and everything. Love everything they provide, but in a sense, they're a band-aid. It's sort of like an NGO that provides soup kitchens for the homeless. Like, that should have been provided by the government, and the government failed and didn't provide it. So like that's how I feel about like unions. Like I've no problem with unions. It's funny. Way back in the day, I used to date a girl who worked for AFL-CIO, and like when I talked about things, she'd just be like, "You're an absolute moron." Like she just tell me like, "No, you have no idea what you're talking about." But like, but that's just kind of like, again, my abstract beliefs. But again, like if I'm not being hypocritical, like, okay, are we anywhere close to the government providing the services that unions provide? No. So I suppose in the practical sense, in the short term practical sense, like I have to support unions because government is nowhere close to providing the functions that they're providing. So yeah, so it's it's nice to see unions getting some some airtime and people talking about them again, because I think we definitely went to a position in our society where we destroyed them and didn't replace them with things to protect workers. But oh, Lee Atwater was Lee Atwater was a great campaign manager. This is back. We're now like an hour ago. I'm sorry, but like it's Lee Atwater like did the strategy for H.W. Bush and like and sinking Dukakis. Dukakis. Now keep in mind that like it was quite an impressive like feat that H.W. Bush like won that election. Like Reagan had finished his 8 years and was not exactly popular, and Dukakis was a very strong candidate. He was very smart. He was very popular. He was a big union guy. Um, what he had going against him was the fact that he was short, and he, you know, even though he was Greek, he looked Jewish and things like this. Like, and so the fact that like H.W. Bush like somehow won that election when Dukakis was clearly the smarter man, the better man, more in line with like what Americans believed and their values and things like that. But like they pulled this stuff like all of a sudden they changed the subject, and that election they were talking about the issues were flag burning and the death penalty. Like those were the big issue, like flag burning. That was the big issue. And you know, like Dukakis had to be sitting there and being like, if someone wants to burn the flag, they can burn the flag. And everyone's like, oh my gosh, this guy hates America. And you're like, ah, they freaking hosed him. Hosed poor Dukakis. Dukakis was a great man. He was a great man. Um, do you think Dark Sister Blackfire come back? I do. I do think they come back. Certainly they're back in the fanfic. But yeah, I do think that they're going to come back. It's pretty. I mean, we've been told by George that Dark Sister is with Bloodraven, and Blackfire just seems like an obvious thing at some point to come back, or at least you know a copy of Blackfire. To you know, it's just been brought up too much as something that shows legitimacy. And you know, it being, you know, these crowns and swords were very important during the Dance of the Dragons. So you'd think during a second Dance of the Dragons it would come back. But I think both swords are coming back. Um, have you read any of the wildcard books? I have. I've read actually most of them. Um, I think I skipped some. I skipped some that didn't have George stories in them, which is actually a lot. But I've read all of the ones that have George stories in them. Um, but the um, it's you know, people ask me like, are they worth it? And I'm like, yeah, they're fine. They're fine. But you're just, you know, it's not, I don't know. There's a lot of great things to read in the world. So I don't know if I'd really recommend them to anyone. Like, you know, if you read, if one is lying around and you've got nothing to do, say you're on a plane and there's a wild cards book there, I'd be like, go for it. You know, like it's not, but it's nothing I would ever recommend to somebody. I'd never recommend like, oh, you need to buy this and read it because it's like incredible. You know, I can say that about a lot of George R. R. Martin stories. Like I like if somebody wants to say like, Should you read Meat House Man? I would say yes. You should absolutely read Meat House Man. It's a fucking crazy, incredible story. Should you read Song of Leah? Yes. Should you read Sand Kings? Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. Crazy, incredible stories, independent of anything, independent of whether or not you want to know more about Ice and Fire. They're just good stories. I would never recommend Wildcards. I'm sorry. Like, I'm sorry. Hey, Preston, fellow Baltimore County guy. Can you talk in Dundalk? Can you talk Dundalk guy accent? Go Tigers. Yeah. I mean, it's the Dundalk is the. Hey, hon, let's get down the road to the O's game. We'll pick up a 6-pack of Natty Bear and we'll go deck pin bowling, hon. Yeah. Kel Ripken's the man. He's the Iron Man. He's gonna go all the way. Yeah, hon. That's the Baltimore accent, which is kind of funny. Like you never come across it except for like background characters in The Wire, who have the accent, and it's kind of funny because even in that there are people that were like, oh, he's got a Baltimore accent. I'm like, no, they didn't. He doesn't have a Baltimore accent. But Dundalk is just kind of known as the more Baltimore than Baltimore accent. The Essex Dundalk. A lot of nobles hate the Lannisters, even by the standards of the cruel world. Lord Tywin seems to have spent his life crossing lines that are certain nobles, at least, are culturally wrong. Yeah, I'm trying to think about um, I'm trying to think yes, Tywin's a dick. Tywin's an absolute dick. But is Tywin super atypical? And I don't know if Tywin is super atypical. I mean, we think about these like crazy worlds that that we kind of like live in this world. Like you've got Randall Tarley, who is worse than Tywin, right? Like Randall Tarley is horrible. And then but even characters we're supposed to somewhat like Mathis Rowan, who's supposed to be like a good guy, like he sent a dude to the wall for nothing, like ruined this kid's life. Um, Lysa was given a forced abortion and like forced to marry an old man. Um, Catelyn was, forced to have sex with some dude that she'd never met and marry him. There's a lot of these little things that once you kind of look in the context of their lives that are just horrible. The Mountain, and their family. Walder Frey and like how he treats his family. I mean, he lets them all live there, but like how they all like compete and backstab. Black Walder sleeping with people's wives, people, in order to try to undermine succession arguments. Um, you know, it's like every little piece you start learning about these people's stories and they all suck. Like everybody sucks. Like, right. Um, it's like you want to have a fantasy book where people are, there's someone to root for, and like Ned is a horrible dude. Like he begins the book executing somebody and gives his kids a bunch of like dire wolves. Like that sucks. Like these are horrible situations. And if we're accepting that R plus A equals J, he never tells John who his mom is. Like, and John goes his entire life and joins the Night's Watch because he doesn't think he has any opportunities in life, and he just lets that happen. Like, these are all really bad people, like doing things that none of us would have ever done. Could you imagine ever doing that to Ned? I mean, doing what Ned did. So I don't know. Yeah, there's a lot of reasons to hate Tywin, but all these people aren't too much better. All these other people aren't too much better. Um, Have you heard the theory that Just Made was a rocket launcher? Oh. So this comes from so in A Feast for Crows, uh, the in A Feast for Crows, uh, Nimble Dick and Brienne are telling stories about a character named Sir Galadin of Morn. And one of the things that's not very obvious in this story is that, like, when Brienne tells the story of Galadin of Morn and how perfect he is, he's the perfect knight. She's also failing to mention that, like, her brother who died was named Galadin. So by telling the story of Galadin of Morn, she's telling the story of her brother. Her brother died and therefore is perfect, in people's minds. Very Catcher in the Rye, right? Um, so Galadin of Morn, the legend is that he had this sword called Just Made, but he never used it because uh, it would have made any like fight unfair, and so he only used it maybe against a dragon, but never against any other people. And so this idea is that, like, okay, how did it's one of these things that um it's one of these things that he only unsheathes it like 3 times. So how did he slay a dragon with this sword if it was so awesome? So maybe it was actually a rocket launcher, and he only had like 3. He only had a limited number of things in that. Which, I mean, I suppose that makes sense. How are you defeating a dragon? I'm going to use a rocket launcher. I mean, silly, though it kind of makes sense in some respect. Um. Oh, I see. Missed the point of the 5-year gap. Why do they have to be doing the same thing for 5 years? Why can't they have off-screen plot developments? It's a very good point that, like, if you really wanted, like, you could have Victarion go off to find Danny and then end up and then be in a completely different situation. Like, maybe he got tied up in the store in the Summer Islands and got sick. Maybe he was put in jail and had whatever adventures for 5 years. Why do they have to be doing the exact same thing for 5 years? Um, I mean, you're right that they could have just you could find them in a completely different situation, um, and uh, but I suppose it's just like in the places that George left them, it all made sense for a 5-year gap. Like Danny learning to rule to be queen. How much time does that take? Well, it probably takes more than a few months, you know, as we've learned in A Dance with Dragons. Um, that doesn't seem sufficient, but like 5 years is sufficient. Like John being Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, like, and then making very bold decisions that eventually lead to does it make sense that he's that bold after only a few months? Like, usually, a lot of times people aren't that bold in their jobs when they first get it. Um, but after 5 years, yeah, Arya getting to her level of development, yeah, it definitely, like, doesn't make too much sense in her trading thing now. But so it's just like how George left the characters seem like, why not have nothing happen to them for 5 years, or the same thing happen to them for 5 years? All of it, but you're right that they could have had you could have a situation where it's just completely dynamically different. But then that, like, what was Victarion doing with a fleet of ships for 5 years? What was Euron doing for 5 years? Um, I suppose we could pick up 5 years later, and, like, a brief peace has been made with the Ironborn or something, and people have, some marriages were made or something like that. But all that was possible, but George didn't do it. Um, um, Season 3-ish of Game of Thrones, Arya and Melisandre have this entirely random interaction. Naturally, no resolution. Do you believe the books would elaborate? Hmm. I'm trying to think. So the interaction between Arya and Melisandre only happens in the show because the characters of Edric Storm and Gendry Storm, or Gendry Rivers, or what, Gendry and Edric Storm are merged. That's the only reason Melisandre appears, and and the showrunners thought, oh, that kind of makes sense. The Brotherhood without banners are Lord of Light followers. Melisandre's a Lord of Light followers. We can eliminate a character, by merging them, and for the most part, that worked out. And so they decided to have this like scene where Melisandre says, you're going to kill many people, with her order is actually like, is it brown eyes, blue eyes, green eyes, or something? It's some list like that. Um, and so when they brought it back at the end, they had to actually change the line to put blue eyes last to even make it to make it like make any sense. So it was a little forced, and and it was just one of those like happy coincidences that the showrunners thought they could like put in there to make it seem like this was all planned. But had it been actually planned, he would have put Blue Eyes last when Melisandre met her back in season 3. You know, so I don't think that Melisandre will meet Arya in the books, or if they do, it's not going to be the same. I mean, I get the whole idea of like having Arya like kill the Night's King or be the chosen person that stops everything. It's kind of George, like yes, it is. Um, but and if Melisandre like meets Arya later, could she think she's Azor Ahai and all of that? Yeah, I could see that happening. I could. Um, but um, but yeah, I mean, I suppose it wasn't entirely random how the showrunners did it. They tried to have it like pull all back together. Um, but I think yeah, I mean, it could it be that like yeah, Melisandre's going to think that Arya is Azor Ahai, maybe, or that Arya is going to fulfill the Azor Ahai prophecy, maybe. I mean, George loves Arya like characters. He loves them. He loves them. But that's a possibility. But again, we're never going to get the last book, so that question will never ever be answered. So um, who would you consider the main point of view of each book and why? Well, I think we naturally like the first book, we know it's Ned. Like Ned is the main story of the first book, and because it's not just Ned, it's the additional characters surrounding Ned. Their story just is there to support Ned, right? And support Ned's story. Like Sansa and Arya do have separate point of views, but they in no way need separate point of views. You could have removed them. Um, I'm trying to think like maybe Arya at Derry would have been hard to have, but like all the rest of them, I'm thinking like right, like the Arya chapters are like what she gets needle from John. That could have been a John. Um, could have been a John thing, right? Let me see here. Sort. Let's see here. What's going on? You certainly don't need both. I mean, Sansa's there at the end to be the point of view in King's Landing because Ned has been killed, so you can get King's Landing plot. But so what? Like the first Arya is introducing her and then getting Needle. The second one is them in King's Landing and meeting Syrio Forel. And the third one is her chasing cats and hearing Varys and Illyrio. I know that's a nice little scene there, but then she goes and meets her dad. Um, and then she then is there to observe like what then there's the chaos when the coup happens, and then the execution, right? So you look at that and you say, okay, I understand. Like Sansa and Arya used to be kind of merged characters, and then John kind of, George R. R. Martin split them. So you can kind of get that like Arya's plot and Sansa's plot revolves around Ned's plot, and he has 15 freaking chapters. So it's like he has 15 chapters, and then a bunch of chapters surrounding him that support his story. Um, and so he's definitely now in a Clash of Kings. You kind of feel that Arya is the main one. I think she has the most points of view in that one. Um, Even though she just wanders around, she feels like she's the main character of that book. But to tell you the truth, even though that Arya has the most chapters, Catelyn seems to be the one that feels like she's the real plot driver, right? Because she's the one that like meets Stannis and deals with Robb, and the armies are all around her. Or maybe nah, you know what? I'm gonna say Tyrion. Tyrion, he's in King's Landing. He's driving most of the politics stuff. Um, I'd say Tyrion for book two, definitely. Then book three, John definitely feels like the main character because there's just so much with his story with the wildlings and the battles and Stannis. And then four, you definitely feel like Cersei is the main character of that book, dealing with King's Landing. And then um, with the fifth book, you kind of feel it's Daenerys because even with Daenerys, the other points of view kind of all revolve around Daenerys. Tyrion is going to see Daenerys. Quentin is going to see Daenerys. Victarion is going to see Daenerys. Barristan was only invented because Daenerys left. And then you have Daenerys. Um, yeah, there's Jon and like Theon and Davos all relate to Jon, but it just feels like a Daenerys book. So there's my answer. Ned, Tyrion, no, yeah, Ned, Tyrion, Jon, Cersei, Daenerys. That's it. Um, Varys hides Jaqen, removes need for burn and blood and money. Um, oh, hires Jaqen, removes need for bum blood and money. Um, mm, 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 mm. The other thing that I was thinking about this, I'm not quite sure what this means, but the I think Varys, if they have all the money to hire Jaqen, I feel like Varys wouldn't have been killing people himself and using little birds and stuff like that. But like I said, vaguely makes sense, but I don't know why. Like to keep Jon Snow, why not kill Jon Snow versus like killing Howland Reed? Just kill Jon Snow. Um, what odd pairings would you like to see create? Mel and Asha, Sam and Aaron, Victarion and Barristan. Um, So you're kind of reading my mind with fanfic and such. Like I do kind of think that if you're gonna keep if you're gonna keep Barristan alive, he's gonna naturally pair with Victarion, um, which is quite a odd couple and interesting. Um, I kind of like Jorah and Tyrion, for example. But then, I'm trying to think like who else would be really interesting. Like I say, like Sweet Robin and Daenerys is ridiculous. Mel and Asha, man, they would not get along. Mel doesn't get along with anybody. So, um, but man, also like there's so many cool pairings there. I mean, Asha and Stannis is already pretty cool, but think about how cool Asha and Ramsay and like them trying to interact and how she's going to handle Ramsay if they had to interact. Um, that would be nuts, you know. um, but I'm trying to think of some other crazies. But yeah, Sam and Euron is pretty insane. Sam meeting Euron is insane because it just seemed like they're from different worlds. Euron running into anybody seems like a different world. Like he just seems like his personality just doesn't fit with anybody because he's just so crazy. Um, but yeah, the but what's really a possibility? You know, Hota and Sam, Hota and Euron, like them running into each other. Euron, Hota and Euron. Um, uh, you know, I'm trying to think of it. You know, any others that are really possible even. Um, you know, there's just not. There's not even many that are possible at this point in the story. But are you a creative, artistic freedom absolutist? Um, I'm not. I'm not quite sure. Um, exactly. The because I'm just trying to think of like there's obviously like at any point because art is a form of freedom of speech, but all freedom of speech has its limits, right? You can't yell fire in a crowded movie theater. Today, I you know so you know obviously there's aspects to that. I'm trying to think that but for the most part, you know, obviously I like a lot of freedom of creativity. I think the thing that's actually harming artistic freedom the most is um, overuse of copyright and things like that, and everybody getting sued for creating something that's derivative of something else because everything's derivative of something, you know. So, um, you know, I don't think I'm absolutist for anything, because you can always find a time in which um, art, you know, can cause problems and needs to be censored. Like you can always like hypothetically come up with that situation, but certainly like around the world, uh, more so than you know in America, like artists are jailed in the Middle East and China for all sorts of reasons that I think are unjust because you know art should be like freedom of speech, and I do think that it's the biggest threat is probably overuse of the of copyright and the or kind of dictatorial sense in that sense. I mean, it's weird thing how we spend so much time fearing government, but like you know the tyranny of corporations is much worse. So I don't know if I'm an absolutist in any sense for anything. You know you can't, but I certainly think that currently right now artists need to have more freedom and and should be protected more. Certainly globally, and in America, I think that they're um, I think people are getting sued too much for similar stories or whatever. Um, let's see, top three characters and why. Um, thoughts on Brand Three. Um, my favorite characters are probably Sweet Robin, Theon, and Aaron. I think that they're just the weirdest and most broken, and so you get the oddest kind of emotional ideas and opportunities and things that are interesting with them. You know, I even though like Aaron is not somebody I'd want to ever hang out with, like he's fascinating and how weird and crazy and the opportunities for his story are great. Like I like Sweet Robin for different reasons. I think he's also broken, but also like very real. I think Theon is very real and broken at the same time. So I kind of just I really enjoy those characters um, as real real emotional characters that have something, for us to learn about. There's a bunch I do like. I mean, I like Quentin. I like Asha a lot. But it's it's like getting into like really like capturing the human condition, and is is something I'm interested in, and stuff I find real like reading about. My thoughts on Brand 3. I've spent a lot of time thinking about Brand 3, reading Brand 3, going over Brand 3. Um, it is a it's also clearly like a chapter that George spent a lot of time on. And I'll say this about it. He kind of screws up with it. He screws up in that it's not in Bran's voice. Bran had a voice in his stories. And you can there's this cool little item on online called the that can help with your writing, and it's free. It's called the Hemingway editor. It has it's minimal use, but nonetheless, it's something that when you write something, throw it into the Hemingway editor, and it'll tell you if it's like a simple, if it's simple writing or complicated. Bran is a simple character. He's a young boy, and when you read his previous stuff, like it's written like a simple child. And then all of a sudden Brand 3 comes along and it's written, there's a few sentences here and there that sound like Bran, but for the most part it's written like it could be anybody else. It could be Jon, it could be maybe not as complicated as Barristan and Tyrion, because they're very complicated, but like it's as complicated as the other characters. So George he either spent so much time with it that he removed the simplicity of it and wanted to make things more beautiful and complex, or he like or he screwed up with it and just like or maybe he thought Bran aged and changed his character. But it's very clearly a more complicated writing style. The language that you use, the length of sentences, just everything. So in that sense, like it's strange to like, it's a beautiful chapter and there's a lot of cool stuff that happens in it. I reread it a lot, and so in that sense, it's a great success as a chapter I want to go back to and read over and over again. I have no interest in reading Bran 1 and 2, for example. Like Bran 1 and 2, nothing happens, and so like Bran 3 is like super fascinating, and it's so rich, but at the same time, it's weird that George fucks up and doesn't make it in Bran's voice. So it's like I love it, but I'm also torn. I like recognize the problems with it. Recommendation, don't need to reply. Jasper of Ford is my favorite author, and his books, and all his books, the government struggles with stupidity surplus, which requires them to invest in nonsense projects to reduce it. The those sorts of things, there's aspects of truth to that. It's not that there's not aspects of truth to it. But it's I'm trying to think like my experience. Like it's not like my experience in government. Like it's not like I don't deal with just Kafka-esque level of bureaucracy, like working for the government for a lifetime and knowing about it. Like it's just like the ridiculousness of like the things I've seen. But in many ways it's also like I don't know if it's so much the system or the government as like the people within it, and like the people within it lacking courage as well. Or maybe the government breeds that kind of like thinking and things like that. So yeah, I mean it's all I wouldn't say that it's I would say that all that all that's true about government, but at the same time, like government is also certainly necessary. Douglas Adams in A Restaurant at the End of the Universe, right, has the crew meet a planet of bureaucrats, and the thinkers and the doers decide to get rid of the middlemen, and he lists these middlemen as a bunch of useless paper pushers and telephone inspectors, and then the planet of thinkers and doers like ends up perishing from a telephone infection. Ironically, like they needed those middlemen, and that's kind of the thing with government. Which is a Song of Ice and Fire YouTuber would be most likely to be arrested for storming the Capitol? Uh, so I'll say this about, generally speaking, the super fans of A Song of Ice and Fire tend to all be left wing and tend to agree politically. I don't think many of them would ever be like at the Capitol. Like none of them would have that kind of level of extremity. Even though I know a couple that are right wing, like a couple that may have been like Trump supporters at one time, but they would never be at the level of like showing up to the Capitol. I mean, I think some people in the comments like are talking about this, but I don't know. I don't know. Maybe Karma would have a different perspective, but I don't think it's definitely uh like even the Song of Ice and Fire YouTubers that don't like each other or don't agree with each other or have problems, like they tend to all like agree politically. It's let's see here. I'm getting a lag. I'm getting it too. Damn it. He's just lost in thought. Oh no. Um I was thinking about this freedom of speech aspect. It's an interesting thing because people do have like our legal aspects of freedom of speech are quite narrow, and yet culturally there is kind of this weird thing in America of like I have the right to say whatever I want to say with no consequences, and you're like um you know um John Denver was full of shit. One of the best. You should look up a YouTube Upright Citizens Brigade thing on John Denver fan club and how he was edited. He was censored because of his original lyrics, which are um, everything was a nutsack essentially. Sunshine on my nutsack makes me happy. Um, did we talk about government shutdown? We have not talked about any government shutdown. Um, Government shutdowns are ridiculous, but on a personal level, I fucking love them. But they're horrible. They're horrible for everybody else. They're horrible, and people. But like for me, it's like, oh, I get paid and I don't have to work. Like that's great. I love them. Some people in government hate them because they're like, oh, it interrupts all the work I'm trying to do. And I'm like, I do not care. You can interrupt my work all day long. Oh my gosh. um, the lying being freedom of speech is a strange battle we're fighting right now. Yeah, well, this is the whole thing is the fire in a movie theater situation, right? Like, at what point does your lying reach societal harm to like yelling fire in a movie theater? So like for instance during a pandemic where people are not getting vaccinated because of lies, I would argue that reaches a level. You're killing people. You are literally killing people. I think that like lying about an election and like fundamentally like undermining like democratic institutions reaches that level. But yes, it's quite a battle. It's quite a balance of like at what level are you allowed to lie? Um, yeah. John Denver was involved in the anti-PRMC movement, though. Didn't he appear in front of Congress with D. Snyder and Frank Zappa? He did. He did. Um, Preston still gets paid on shutdowns. Yes, yes, I do. Yes, I do. Um, in fact, it's more like starting to get paid. So because I'm currently on like leave without pay, um, and so while I'm here until I go back to America. But because like during a shutdown, you can't be on leave status, so you get your pay. So during shutdown, I would start getting money for doing nothing. So it's some great some great things. Um, but yeah, I thought the whole point was to not pay them. No, like so first of all, like before it used to be a situation where it used to be unknown. So you'd furlough the government worker, and then it was unknown if at the end of the furlough you'd get your back pay. And it just so happened that every time there was, you got the back pay. But there was always this anxiety, like, I don't know if I'm gonna get it. Like if shut down for a week, like um it, I don't know if I'm gonna get that 2 weeks or not. And then they passed a law in 2019 that says that no, you will always get that back pay. And so it went away. So like now there's no anxiety. As long as you're not a person that lives paycheck to paycheck. Now there's a lot of people that live paycheck to paycheck, like a TSA screener, somebody that earns, government employee that doesn't earn very much. So yeah, for them, like the less, like there's a huge government shutdown that was like 35 days, like back in what, 2019, like that would be really hard for people to like go like more than a month without a paycheck. Like that's a tough thing for them. I can go more than a month without a paycheck. It's fine. Um, so it's so it's tough, tough situation. But I mean, for me personally, I'm like, shutdowns, free money, free money. I remember the night Preston read 3 of my comments, I immediately updated my LinkedIn. Now he just scrolls past me. Was it just like a motivation thing? You got motivation? Um, the I don't know who decides the lie though. Opening that door opens the door to massive government overreach. I think certain things are so here's the thing is like again we're kind of worrying about government overreach, like what happens when there are powers more powerful and have more money than the government, you know so like what happens when Elon Musk, it's in his best interest to undermine democracy, and claim that like there was a problems with the election, or somebody that's trying to sell some product that wants to undermine vaccines, or like somebody like Joe Rogan who's pulling in like millions and millions of dollars based on lying about vaccines. Like at what point, you know all of a sudden like these private individuals overreach is way more than the government. Like people keep fearing these government overreach kind of situations, but I don't know. We don't have that much government overreach in America. Like, what's the worst you can say about government in America? That it like is bureaucratic and it's some red tape. Like, we don't have situations in America where people are getting arrested and like their lives are getting destroyed by government overreach. I understand these theoretical things, like, oh, but the government could theoretically one day do this thing. Yeah, well, certain things are pretty easy to prove, like whether a vaccine is effective, or whether that movie theater is on fire and things like that. Government workers are no, I mean, not in a present sense, are still getting paid. They, when a government shutdown happens, they don't get paid, and then until when it's over, they get paid. You know, so um, the Three Body Problem adaptation is very good. Did it come out? I thought it was coming out January 2024. Um, so we'll see. I mean, we'll see. Um, yeah, I mean, everybody's hoping about it. Um, are you sad leaving Taiwan in a year for the Dominican Republic? I mean, I leave Taiwan in 2 months. 2 months. In a year, I'll be in the Dominican Republic, but I'll leave Taiwan in 2 months. Um, but yeah, no, I'm sad. I like Taiwan a lot. I like Taiwan a lot. Hello, hello. What's going
This
on?
this is another three body problem thing. You have the Dave and Dan one, and then a bunch of Chinese companies are just making movies on it.
Oh, really?
And yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh, okay. So there's a Chinese one that's pretty good.
Yes,
Oh,
and I think
interesting.
there's another Chinese one. I don't. It's one of those things.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Military reach, police overreach. Um, the thing with military, well, let's talk about police overreach for a second. Police overreach is not really an aspect of like the government having too much power. It's almost a problem with the government having too little power, right? Because there's not enough government oversight of the police. It's not that there's like too many police, you know. The number of bodies out there isn't too many. We aren't like bumping into cops everywhere. If only we didn't have so many cops. It's cops being corrupt and arresting people for no reason, planting evidence on them and things like that, right? And that has to do with like not enough government oversight of the police. So I almost see it as like a too little government situation. Like somebody decided to poorly fund the police department and not structure it right. And you just sent a bunch of thugs out there and said police, and said, just do it. Um, Military overreach. I don't know if military overreach has much to do with like the funding either. It just seems to be random decisions of like the higher ups, right? Um, so I mean, it's like when we start talking about like a policy in place, like should facts should statements that are harmful to society be prevented, um leading to more like too much government overreach. I'm not getting that connection. Like at what point when you start like saying like, oh, maybe you shouldn't be able to say that like the election was stolen when it wasn't, or maybe you shouldn't be able to lie about vaccines. Like walk me through to where that leads to too much government. How walk me through how this leads to 1984 and Animal Farm or Nazi Germany. Like walk me through that path. Um, would be the thing I'd say. So how you doing, Carmine? What's going on?
I am okay. I am okay. Okay. I was gonna ask you about something, but take care of that guy's Patriot Act question.
Oh, Patriot Act though. I mean, do we have any examples of like the Patriot Act like overreaching? I mean, it's I know it was like theoretically people feared it would, but like how many examples of the Patriot Act do we really have of like us descending into a horrible situation, you know? And this was more about like removing this was actually more about the Patriot Act was more about removing government barriers, right? Removing due process, right? Even in that situation. But like again, it's like, it's like what is these theoretical questions of like what is more government versus less government? Like a Patriot Act, like this allows us to streamline stuff with less government. Oh, okay. You know. Um You were talking about Gitmo earlier, right? Gitmo is an example of too little government. It's something existing extra judiciously, judiciously, extra. It's a piece of land outside of legal jurisdiction. So it's a situation where there's too little government, not too much government, right? Like when people talk about like too much bad government, I think of like red tape. I think of Brazil, like that, those sorts of situations. But like, what are these situations of like too much government? Um, According to Snowden, government officials use Patriot Act to jerk off to naked women. Yeah, that was a little weird. I could admit that the Snowden stuff that he brought in was very weird. And again, that a lot has to do with like what the private sector getting around and doing weird things with like laws, right? Like the government is completely is allowed. Well, you know, once something went international, then all of a sudden U.S. laws didn't apply, so they were able to like do stuff. And again, it's like the lack of laws, right? Rather than there being like too many laws in that situation, right? Like there was nothing in place that said technology had gotten to the point where the technology was past the law. So essentially, the FBI was doing something because there was no law on the book on what happens when data goes international. Well, then all of a sudden they can spy on it. You know. Um, um, I thought the Patriot Act was government storing all telecommunications so they could pursue it at their leisure. Patriot Act was a lot of things. Patriot Act is a lot of things. But there's, it's a telephone book law. So, but what Snowden was upset about. I mean, he was upset about a few things, but he was upset about the fact that like the FBI has a specific mandate that says they're not allowed to spy on U.S. citizens, and CIA cannot even deal with U.S. citizens at all, unless the FBI has like a warrant, right? Because there's a legal process. You can't just like observe somebody without a warrant. However, if like something's international and it's not in a U.S. jurisdiction, like all of a sudden, if your data, because it's on a cloud network, goes out of America, is your data protected by American laws? And it wasn't, So, um, mm, mm, mm. Yeah, I mean, I would agree with this, like dumb government with little oversight and too much funding and power. Like that's the thing is what you really want is like a good amount of oversight. You want a lot of laws put in place on what their mission is, so they're not confused. You want oversight. You want you want things to be open. You want the public to know about this stuff. You want whistleblower protection. Um, all sorts of things that are really useful for effective governance. You know, there's a great little organization called Pogo that I really appreciate. It's called the Project on Government Oversight. Um, they do good work, but yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of like watchdog groups. I'm a big fan of inspector generals. I'm a big fan of auditors. I'm a big fan of the IRS. I'm a big fan of like anybody that comes in and like oversees everything and tries to get things to work and stops like corruption. But like, it's like by just saying like government by itself, like the way to limit government overreach is to like not fund something, or is probably not the way to go, you know. Um, mm, 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 mm. What's been going on? What's been going on, Carmine?
I'll have to tell you after the stream. But by the way, I'm so glad you didn't mention me to be one of the people would storm the Capitol.
Oh,
Would have
you
been very
you
upset.
you would never.
Yeah. I don't even drive near police stations. So I wanted to talk to you briefly before I let you go, which, by the way, has become a meme because I
Yeah,
always
of
seem.
course, of course.
uh, did you see that George R. R. Martin was one of the many writers suing ChatGPT?
I did. That's kind of interesting. Yeah.
I kind of wanted to discuss that with you briefly, if you don't mind, because on one hand, AI is getting out of control, especially with like copying your likeness and stuff, which is what
Hmm. I
the
do
actors are
agree.
all
I do
fighting.
agree. This is like what
But
I say, the tyranny of the private sector, and like what governments like needs to come in and do something.
hmm but on the other hand, I think AI is a great tool to allow anyone to get in on certain avenues that they weren't able to before. AI has been helping people learn to video edit. AI has been
Mm.
helping people learn to, speak other languages, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, you are cutting out the people who teach those things when AI starts getting good at that. But at the same time, when everyone can do it, I think, I don't know, there's a benefit to it. I'm split.
Um, I mean, it's an odd thing. Like I'm trying to think about um like what happens if there's no like purpose for writers anymore if everybody just starts using like AI, you're saying, and like um but at the same time I do fundamentally believe that that copyright law has gone too far and that we need to kind of loosen it, but then at the same time AI comes around to like circumvent all the laws, so it's definitely a problem. Did you
Oh, don't say it out loud. Don't say it out loud. But no, so
oh
is that your
jeez.
official? Yeah, that's your official stance on AI? Is that it's complicated.
It's
It's
complicated.
complicated.
It's complicated, but it's one of those situations where I think that the government should probably intervene and figure out some problems with it. But soon George will sue Preston. We'll see. We'll see.
Oh, you wouldn't? Is that possible? Is that a thing that can
Yeah,
happen?
I'll see it. If a cease and desist would probably be the first thing.
No, you'd have to if you got that as like an email, you have to frame it. That would have to go in like right in the back, right in the wall, right there.
Yeah, yeah, I guess. Yeah.
What's Cersei's line? Wear it like a badge of honor.
uh Yeah, what do I think about IRS agent shortage? It's too bad. We need more people in the IRS pulling in the money, pulling in the money. Um, but the it's too bad. Too bad because a lot of people are just skipping out on their taxes. There's a have you heard of the show called How To on HBO, Carmine?
No, I have not. Is it new?
It's like 3 or 4 years old. It's got 3 seasons. It's quick. You can
Hmm.
binge it. It's like 6 episodes a season, 30 minutes. But one of his episodes is about how to split a check, and it's essentially like he begins with this like question, and then it's a documentary, and then he kind of goes on tangents, and pretty soon your tangent has nothing to do with the episode. So he's talking about how to split a check, but it eventually gets into like society, because like splitting a check is very similar to like society itself. Like people wanting to, because he's a filmmaker and he's like, well, what if I just film everything, like a little bit of everything I do? Um, can I write this off on my taxes? And he goes to his accountant, and the accountant's like, yeah, no, I think in good faith, if you're a filmmaker, and and he's like, okay, so he starts filming like just one like split second of every product he's buying at the grocery store. And he's like, I guess this is all I can write this off. But then he starts getting into the things. If everybody feels like this, then like somebody's getting hosed. And how do you pay for stuff? Like splitting a check, at dinner when you go out with your friends.
I know what splitting a check is. Why did you explain that?
So I don't know. I don't know.
By the way, this is a good one. Will this guy say because you can't copyright something that doesn't exist? True, they can't sue you. You can't sue you. It doesn't exist.
Right, it's the same characters and stuff like that. Yeah, but but I just feel bad like when it's. I mean, the thing is, it's not even 75 years or 105 years after death of an author. Like George R. R. Martin's still alive, so yeah, he could send a cease and desist at any time to anybody that like has a channel that uses a Westeros themed idea. He could probably like shut them down if he wanted. He's got more money. He can do whatever he wants. He can do whatever he wants. Um, um, the let's see. Has IRS ever been at a point where they saturated agents and didn't see a cash flow on employment? Generally speaking, it's pretty clear relationship between the number of agents and the amount of revenue. Like it's very very clear when they have more agents, they pull in more revenue. It's simple math because every person like exists is a certain amount of money that they're pulling in. That's just how it is. You hire one guy for $100,000, he's bringing in $5 million for the government. Like, and it just kind of goes like that. Every agent is a certain amount of money because that's how much time you have. I mean, it goes for me too. I mean, my job is oversight. It's all about pulling in money back for the government. So, um, if we need to move away from income tax to wealth tax. Too much passive income now. I kind of agree with that. I agree with that. I think that, interestingly enough, this has been brought up at various times in history about the maximum wage, that there should be a maximum amount of money that someone should be allowed to have, or a maximum wage that somebody's allowed to earn per year, um, to offset the minimum wage, and that you put them in relationship to each other. That one is 1,000 times more than the other. But of course, like we live in a world where literally some people earn $10,000 a year and some people earn um, $10 billion a year, and that the difference between those is quite enormous. So, but what's funny is that like you the income is income, capital gains are taxed. Yeah, so the way around things is there's I mean, obviously like capital gains is at a lower rate than income, and so the more it's still income and you're still getting taxed, but like it's not at income tax rate. Like we have these different terms that people conflate. Like there's payroll tax, there's income tax, capital gains, you know um, and such. you know then you're gonna also have your property taxes and whatever. But um, but the people, there are definitely ways people go around it. I mean, Trump didn't pay any taxes because of tricks he did with depreciation. Um, yeah, yeah, all this is true too. People can get paid in stock, and then you're never actually like increasing your value, or like because you're not selling it yet and stuff like that. So we don't know. Um, right, like you think we should regulate capitalism with taxes? That's crazy. I know. I know. Um, way too many taxes. Well, the thing is, and we can talk about this. The you we can actually like see in America um something called effective tax rate. So a lot of people talk about their income tax or capital gains, and they talk about the various levels. But overall, there is something called effective tax rate, where considering everything, what percentage of your income are you taking home, and what percentage are you going to the the um, the government. And so generally speaking, like all things considered, in America, the effective tax rate for for the very wealthy in America is about 25%. About half of Europe. So everything you earn, you get. That's for now. If you notice here, the top 0.01% actually pays less than the top 1%, which is quite funny. Like they have a few more tricks up their sleeves. While the average person, pays about 15% in tax rate. I mean, um, so let's see here. What if the others are just how the Iron Age peasants perceive high technology thermal suits? Cracking ice is just radio feedback. Giant ice spiders are snow vehicles. Take a shot every time Preston says, keep it in mind." Yeah, no, all that's completely true. If we're talking that the long night was a nuclear holocaust, and that the pre long night world was technologically advanced, then yeah, the others could have strange thermal suits and snow vehicles and things like that. It's completely radio feedback or whatever in their heads. Um, that's a very good idea. It's a very good idea about the crackling ice being radio feedback. Um, yeah, why not? Giant spiders being snow vehicles. I mean, they could be completely be mechanized. Maybe they do really have 8 legs. They're like the mechanism from Wild Wild West, or something. Um, how much does super chat income go to taxes? Well, YouTube takes a certain percentage, um, which is like what, a quarter, and then after that um, it becomes my business income, which is taxed at a normal income rate. Um, so it goes on top of everything else. So yeah, it's 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 quite a bit taken from that, but most of it's from YouTube, which is fine. I mean, YouTube provides a pretty good service, all things considered. I
It
can't
could be
complain too
better.
much, you know. Um, didn't George R. R. Martin confirm in an interview with the others use magic to form ice into swords and armor and stuff? I'm not sure. I've never heard that one. He uses the word magic every once in a while, and it's but then you get into like the Arthur C. Clarke definition of magic. Like, what is magic? Like, is magic just technology that people don't know about yet? Is it conceivable that clearly a person from 1,000 years ago would look at the stuff we have and think it's magic? So there's a lot of ways around that word magic. Um, so it's why would obsidian work then? Well, the idea obsidian is very, very sharp. So there's a couple ideas on why obsidian works. Like the there's obsidian's just sharp and can pierce right through the technology, cut right through it. Um, and then I had another idea about maybe it has to do with like the when something's cold and it becoming like a perfect superconductor or something, silicon. Somebody else, a scientist once posted me something saying no, like, so obsidian wouldn't work like that, you know. But nonetheless, obsidian's very, very sharp. It can go right through stuff. So why not just cut right through the technology? And that's all that's happening. Um, Wild Wild West reference in my Asoft stream. The Wild Wild West. It's weird that the whole thing is based on an episode of Batman. Have you seen all of the Batman animated series, Carmine?
The one where it's the one from the 90s, right?
Yeah, yeah. There's an episode where it for some reason doesn't take place. It's not Batman. It's Jonah Hex. So
Hmm.
he runs into the immortal Egyptian dude, and it flashes back to a previous time with him where he faces off against Jonah Hex, and Jonah Hex is the star. And it's the exact same story as Wild Wild West, but it was an episode of Batman first. So
Hmm.
I know. Um, You need a diamond pickaxe to mine obsidian. That's a fact. Huh. Really? Uh, 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 um. Oh, is this a joke because it's this is Minecraft? Um, yeah, fuck. I got pulled into that. Damn it. Damn it. Um, let's see. Oh, Carmine is out of it today.
No, I'm here. I'm hyper
I know.
focused.
Hyper focus.
Good.
Hyper focus, man. I thought you were gonna get Trey on.
I tried. He maybe next week because he just finished recording like a video. So,
Mm-mm-mm.
I'm not gonna tell you what why he has this theory. He has a theory about Marlon doing blackface.
What? 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 What?
I'll let him explain it next time he's on. I mean,
Oh, this
it's
is
pretty
about because
self-explanatory.
last week we talked about how problematic it would be if Marwin were Makoro because he'd be wearing blackface.
Oh, yeah. He wanted to talk about that and the mirror shield thing.
Okay,
He's
okay,
just been busy.
okay. Yeah, thank goodness my kids don't know about Minecraft yet. My kids. So these are the things. Have you heard of Bluey? Bluey, Carmine? Is that too young for you?
No. I know what Bluey is. I had a chance to watch it one time. I didn't hate it. It's not Caillou.
Right. So, I've tricked my child, and he only thinks that Bluey is in Chinese. So he watches Bluey in
Why?
Chinese. Yeah.
So you can get him learn Chinese
So
because
Yeah, Disney Plus is really great with their Chinese subtitles and Chinese dubbings, and it's great. But Netflix kind of sucks because Netflix has the ability to do all this shit, but purposely doesn't put it in because they're scared that people from different regions will start watching their programs. So, like, when Attack on Titan stopped being on Netflix, it was still on in Japan, but you
hmm.
go to the Japanese and they've removed English subtitles. And so you try to watch in Italy and it's only in Italian subtitles. And then it was in Singapore with English type some subtitles, but you have to like search around. They do this shit, but like Disney Plus is just like you get every subtitle for every language on Earth. Thank you. Like so my kid watches Bluey with Chinese, but he wants to watch like stuff that's in English too much. So he's like, so he purposely is like, oh, can I watch Do Re Mi, which is on like Amazon? I'm like, fuck. Can't you
Well,
just
let me ask you this:
Chinese stuff?
Is there a reason you want your kid to learn Chinese so bad?
Yeah, I mean it's a useful language. You want him to learn. So Carmine, one thing that
I would say
you
Spanish is pretty useful. Spanish,
yeah,
maybe.
and
A,
when we get to the Dominican Republic, it's all fine. Yeah, we'll have him learn some Spanish. But the idea is that like so before the age of like 12, you've got this like very nice language window where language acquisition is remarkably easy, and then your brain shuts down and it becomes just so difficult to learn a language. So the idea is you want to expose your kids before the age of 12 to foreign languages.
hmm.
You are actually blessed in that you were given exposure to
I don't feel blessed.
Portuguese at a young age. That means for you to learn Spanish would be very easy. For you to learn other Romance languages would probably be, fairly simple. You have that built-in advantage because you're exposed at a very young age
Hmm.
to to Portuguese. So,
I
yeah,
guess.
yeah, yeah. So, thank your mom.
Well, I would thank her more if I knew Spanish because it's more useful. Though I do find the random odd like I was gonna say Japanese for some reason, the a random odd Brazilian person just where where I live,
Mm,
like just couple Brazilian stores here. I'm like, whoa, what the fuck? Like Brazilian restaurants. I'm like, whoa, we're in the middle
yeah.
of nowhere and there's all this crap here from Brazilians. What are they doing here?
Okay. First of all, like Brazilians are everywhere. They're freaking everywhere. Okay.
I'm sorry, I
They
apologize to everybody for that.
they yeah. No, I ran into one at the park the other day, and you
In
know,
Taiwan? Would he get
hmm
lost? What is he doing over there?
no, it's just a woman, her kid. They worked here in Taiwan. I mean, come
No,
on.
probably the consulate.
No, it wasn't even that. It was like, um,
Really? Just there? Just to be there?
it's Taiwan. Their husband did something to do with semiconductors,
Of
but
course.
so they're everywhere. They're everywhere. Portuguese is a pretty useful language, all things considered. I mean, I'd rank it as um, I'd rank it pretty high on languages that you're going to learn that are going to be useful. You got Spanish, you got French. What are you going to put third? Chinese, Mandarin? Are you going to put? Are you going
Might
to
as
put
well.
Portuguese? And don't say like Arabic because people don't speak modern standard Arabic. That's not anything people speak. So, um, and everybody that knows
Might as
Hindi
well.
knows English and things like this. So you might as well be Portuguese. Um,
Chinese will be like a language everyone knows in the future if Firefly is to be correct.
yeah,
Or
yeah.
or that one movie from Ryan Johnson with fuck, I forgot the kid's name from The Dark Knight Rises. You know what I'm talking about? The movie where he goes back in time and he's fighting himself?
What?
The Ryan Johnson film where he goes back in time and he fights himself. Looper.
Looper. Oh, okay.
Ah,
That's I mean, I do. Do you appreciate the scene in the middle of Looper where he's like, "Wait, this entire plot doesn't make sense," and Bruce Willis is like, "If I had to sit here and explain it to you, we'll be sitting here with a piece of paper drawing lines all day. Let's just forget about it." And they're like, "Okay." You're like, "No, it's not going to make sense because time travel never makes sense." But it's I do at least appreciate their lampshading in that. Um, if Marwyn is Makoro, who are the fingers? I mean, we talked about this last time. I don't think like it really works out that Marwyn is Makoro because, of course, like where the fuck is Gilly? Where's Eamon's body? Who are the fingers? Like none of this.
I don't think I was there for that conversation last week. So when Trey goes Marlon Blackface theory, I couldn't. What the fuck is that? What
So
even
there's
is?
been
I
a
thought he would just
long
make
there's
that
been a
up.
long long theory that's been. I mean, it's been around for 10 years that Marwyn is Makoro, and
What?
yeah,
Jeez.
because Marwyn disappears at the end of A Feast for Crows, and then we have this other mysterious character who has appeared who wants to find Danny, and so people are just like, well, missing character here, another character here. I mean, it's the exact same logic as R plus A equals J and how people figured it out so quick. John doesn't know who his mom is. Like Liana seems to be having a baby. Let's just put them together, Like, so it's the same kind
Hmm.
of thing. And so it's just missing character, appearing character. They must be the same. So, but it doesn't really make sense timeline wise because if Victorian arrives to Volantis after Makoro is there, so but it's but the Ironborn have already attacking Old Town when Marwyn leaves, so the timeline doesn't really work out. Like the Cinnamon Wind would have to pass Victorian, and then he would do this weird ship swap with Tyrion for no reason, and it just gets complicated and convoluted. But um, uh, will Chinese be useful in 10 years? Not according to the Zehan guy. Um, oh my gosh. So there is a YouTuber called Zehan um, on geopolitics, and half of his content is like is uh is kind of like big global conspiracy stuff. So a lot of his stuff is about China is collapsing, China is collapsing, China is collapsing. Um, and so for a long time, there have been books about how China is going to overtake the world, and there have been books about how China is collapsing. And look, neither is happening. Okay, neither is happening. Like China is going to be a big important country filled with 1.3 billion people, and a lot of those people speak Mandarin, and they're going to be part of like the international community of businessmen and people that travel, and that's just the way it is. Like it's a big part of the world, just like how I was like, Carmine, your Brazilians are everywhere, because there's like 200 million Brazilians, and they how many Brazilians are there?
There's a Brazilians. Ah, by the way, do you know that?
Brazilian.
Ah, did you know that
Yeah.
Fetterman's wife is Brazilian?
Oh, yeah. Well, it's
Fetterman, he's the target when AOC is too busy. He's
I
the guy, I
know
guess. That's that's who they
he
call.
won't wear a suit.
Oh no.
Let me see Fetterman's wife. She's a for Fetterman, man. She is a cutie for Fetterman.
I'm gonna be very real with you. This is something I've just noticed. I'm not being an asshole.
Yeah.
Brazilian women love like these like gigantic white American guys, and it's not for money. It's for like I've seen it for love too. I don't get it. Like Brazilian women, their taste of men and American men remind me of like what I think East European and Russian women like in men, like the
Mm.
big, strong, burly, the mountain guys.
Well,
But
you gotta
oftentimes,
understand, like, we think of things as exotic. Like other people think of things as exotic. Like we are exotic to somebody, and we all forget about that because like we just seem like we're boring. But like we are
hmm,
exotic to somebody, and somebody is like, oh man, that American accent, that is how you say very sexy, and you're like, how really my accent really. That's what we think here in Nantes. We think the American accent is very sexy. You're gonna run into these people. So
I can't think of one accent. Maybe the Californian kid accent.
no,
You know
but
how Californians
because it's your
talk like
ear, man. It's your ear. It's your
they'll have,
ear.
they'll have weird ears if you think
I mean, come on,
like
Carmine.
Boston
Do you do
accent
you,
is sexy.
do you think a Japanese kid is sitting there like being like, oh my gosh, these Japanese girls? Like, no, he lives in Japan. Okay, he's not sitting there fetishizing them, being like, oh my gosh, if I could only dress them in a kimono. Like, no, that's where he comes from. Like, come on.
I guess. I
Like
guess.
the shit, man. So, anyway, on China, the look, China's not falling apart. It's also not going to take over the world. So, anything that says one of the two is ridiculous. So, of course, Chinese is going to be a useful language. There's so many people that speak Chinese, just like there's so many people that speak Brazilian and Spanish and French, and I would say all of these are very useful languages to learn. Now, some people are like, well, why don't you learn German? And you're like, the problem is that every German person who you want to talk to knows English, and the ones that don't are little kids and old ladies, and you don't really want to talk to them.
True.
So, what do you make of Benjen's appearance and clothing? He also seems to goad John at the feast. I feel like D&D misrepresents good old Uncle Benjen. I do not. I don't like D&D's like portrayal of Benjen. Because he just sits there and like gets in fights with Tyrion for no reason because they wanted scenes for for um, for the dink. Um, I think that I mean I don't know about appearance and clothing. Is he just in a black cloak? Is there anything special about it? But Benjen seems like legitimately against John joining the Night's Watch, but then mentions it to Ned, and then Lewin misrepresents that mention as endorsement, and so all of a sudden Ned's like, "Fine, you're joining the Night's Watch." You know, it's kind of a weird little thing. But I don't know his appearance. Let me look it up really quick if I'm missing something. Um, dresses in black as befits a man of the Night's Watch. On formal occasions he wears rich velvet. Well, yeah, he's highborn. High leather boots, silver buckle on his belt. Yeah, I mean, we saw Waymore Royce dressing the same way. So, I mean, we like to think like that Benjen is some sort of like pure character because he disappears and he's been martyred in a sense, but like no, he's a freaking highborn dick like everybody else. He's just like Waymore Royce, you know? In fact, I wonder if like originally Waymar was supposed to be Benjen. Um, right? Because they're the same character and they have the same fate, right? They disappear and um, they're both highborn that dress in like fine things, you know. Um, all right, I'm gonna get going pretty soon. So Jesus definitely spoke English. It's true. It's true. Ryan Johnson's best movie for sure. Looper. I like Looper. I mean, I like Knives Out quite a bit.
I haven't
Um,
seen Knives Out yet or Glass Onion. It's on the list. I promise. I want
yeah.
to.
Um, thoughts on Firefly as a Joss Whedon fan? Yeah, no, look, I'm a huge Joss Whedon fan. And what like it's funny that like his it's funny how like a, a person like Quentin Tarantino can just all of a sudden affect all the other movies, and how Joss Whedon can suddenly like affect all of these movies, you know. That everybody's trying to mimic his style for a generation. um Firefly I thought was a really really great show. um the And I thought the movie did a acceptable job of um closing things out. The Obviously like Joss Whedon has some dated ideas that today seem problematic. I'm going to use that word, you know. um but I thought, as you know, I really love the show. I really love the style of the show. Their misuse of Chinese is kind of funny because it takes place in a world where only English and Chinese are left, but they like don't really say things right, which is kind of weird, you know. Um, like there's just these random scenes, like so like in China there are these steamed buns called baozi, right? They're very very common, and like there's this one scene where like somebody's like, "Oh my gosh, fresh bao," and he's like so like overwhelmed by it. I was like, why would anyone like be going crazy for fresh baozi? Like it like it's just like fast food junk. Like no one would be sitting there and be like, oh my gosh. Or like the difference between like an a like 5 hour old baozi versus like an immediately made baozi is not like extreme. It's not like fresh baked bread from a German bakery or something, you know, where you're like, oh my god. No, it's a baozi. Like no one would do that. Like whatever. I don't know. It's just some weird stuff. But
Did you even like
no,
Firefly?
I
Did we ever
love
talk about
Firefly.
that?
Firefly was great. That was great. That
Did
was
you watch it as it was coming out? Because I feel like a lot of the people who really love it. I watched it. I thought it was okay. It was like a cool Star Trek, a smooth Star Trek.
I will tell you the real story of me and Firefly is once I was hanging out with my girlfriend at the time, home on a like chilling out home on a Friday night, and we turn on the TV because when else? Why would you, as a single person during this time period, be home on a Friday night? And so I'm just I have a girlfriend at the time, so we're chilling out, and I turn it on, and I'm just like, what is this? And it was a scene where they were square dancing, and I was like, what? Like it's like Western, and because they're dressed Eastern and they're doing square dancing. I was like, this is like Western and Eastern, and they're talking about sword fighting. And I was just like fascinated that this would be on TV. I was like, what is this? And then I never like heard of it. I never was able to see it again because I think it was canceled after like 4 episodes or whatever that were played out of order. But I was just like, what? And I was so like amazed by what it was and that it was on TV that when I later heard about it, like that it was the series that everybody was talking about and that you needed to see it, I then got it on Netflix. Was on, it was like mail-in envelopes at the time, so I like ordered it and watched it, and I was just like, wow, this is incredible. And then the movie came out, and I was like, wow, that's great too. But it was, so I mean, I actually saw it on TV when it aired and was unable to like find it again. So and like search for it. It's very crazy.
It's a shame they never really continued, even in some other form besides comics and novels and stuff. Maybe a game or something. I don't know. The fandom was there for it, but I
Oh
guess
yeah,
not enough people.
yeah. Not enough people. I mean, the movie did not do well, or not well enough. Even though like people like think about it, it's just you know. So it was a super original, interesting concept. Liked it a lot, but
That theme
mm,
song is like still stuck in my head. Take my love, take my land. Good songs.
burn the sky and purge the sea. You can't take the sky from me. Whatever.
Yeah, yeah, it's good. I like that.
Um, I think Pennsylvania allowed the government bypass the Fourth Amendment, and it led to more racial discrimination in the United States. However, perhaps I'm mistaken. Um, Fourth Amendment. Um, well, Fourth Amendment um, is unreasonable seizure of a person's home, um, or property without a warrant, and um, Pennsylvania. Let's see if there's a Fourth Amendment kind of thing. Um, I'm not sure what happened, but yeah, I mean, I think having search warrants is generally a pretty good idea. Um, I think they're also like Fourth Amendment also covers like what eminent domain and when people can like take land, um, when the government can take your land to like build something like the border wall or a subway system or stuff like that. Um, what's what I think is the worst overreach though is when it's eminent domain and it's for private uh, benefit. I'm almost okay if you like seize something for the public good, like but like if you're seizing somebody's land and then you're building a stadium that benefits a private company, or a construction worker, private construction company for a wall that has no benefit for the public. Like that poor person that lives on the border had their land taken for somebody else's profit. That's pretty shitty. Okay, so we gotta get going here. Carmine, thank you for joining me. And
Of course.
um, I will I'll talk to you guys next time. Thank you very much. Later.